we could create sentience. This also begs a deeper question: what's the line between natural and artificial?
It would be no difference.
The possibility that humans could play God in a way.
Yeah.
Whew.
The world is discrete as far as we can tell.
Discrete.
Yeah, meaning it's not continuous.
This is where I think science is deeply wrong.
Every culture ended up discovering money. If you think about it, software as a pattern.
It's a language, yeah.
And same thing with government. If you think of it as a software, this is the only pattern that survives.
I think humility is actually a really good strategy for dealing with a complex reality.
Yeah,
basically.
Just be less wrong.
So time is a blockchain. You know, Satoshi called it a time chain, by the way. He never used the term blockchain.
Makes sense.
There's very few rules governing that.
You only need very simple rules to create complexity.
But use the term simulation. I mean, does this infer the existence of God, or at least a word that for the thing that's beyond what we can't know, like the thing executing it? I mean,
yeah. So there's two possibilities.
We were talking about the very lightweight topic of human consciousness. I mean, this has been called the hard problem, right? Like it's one of the most difficult concepts to get your head around because it is the head getting around itself in a way, assuming that consciousness is a brain-bound phenomenon, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Could we start with just your views, perhaps a definition, if you so dare?
Yeah.
What is consciousness?
Yeah. I used to follow Sam Harris a lot, and I like the definition which comes from this guy named, I think, Thomas Nagel. Mm-hmm. He wrote a paper on like what it's like to be a bat, and essentially it just boils down to having subjective experience. So consciousness would be defined as the ability to have a subjective experience, and by that definition, a lot of things. I mean, we can easily, not easily, but we can kind of observe animals and kind of guess based on its behavior and how it interacts. Especially, I don't know if you had pet, but like people who have pets, the way like there is a mutual understanding between like what the animal's doing, he sees what you're doing, and it does seems like at least in mammals there should be subjective experience, but perhaps even plants and you know, lobsters or whatever, anything down to, but yeah, if we think about consciousness as the result of information processing, and it's like a software, then technically it shouldn't be substrate dependent. So it could perhaps not be brain dependent, and any sort of substrate or mechanism that can result in information processing, like a machine, like a computer.
Right.
You could run the software that we call consciousness.
It sounds like we could, by that definition, the ability to have subjective experiences, we could create sentience artificially.
Yes.
This also begs a deeper question: what's the line between natural and artificial? Right? I mean,
it would be the same.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be no difference, because if we define it as just ability to have subjective experience, then consciousness is consciousness. Whether I mean what it experienced will be wildly different, right? Based on the sensors it has, the signals that's going into the information processing mechanism, right? But as a being with subjective experience, I can see a huge difference in like like speed of information processing, right? Like we have neurons, they fire at the speed of sound. It's pretty. I think it's pretty easy to see why we evolved to have all these animals that evolved to have a nervous system. It allows relatively fast, and it allows us to navigate in our environment. Like it makes our muscle twitch. We can do all these things in this sort of environment and react to things, right? Versus something like a plant, which doesn't have a nervous system, right? It moves too. It's the communication comes from like chemical reactions between the cells, and it takes forever for it to move, right? And like to the plant, like we can run circles around it before it does even anything, right? We almost to the point we think it's just static, but that's not true. But we can take one step back, like imagine consciousness in a silicon substrate. Now your information processing is at like speed of light, right? And you can just imagine like how different that experience would be. Like the reason we see things, we have this idea of like things are permanent. Like there's this thing that's here, it's not moving, but we know it's made out of like atoms, and like there's photons coming into my eyes so fast, like before any of my signals can fire. Like there's no way for me to see the photons. But at the speed of sound, if we're able to process things at speed of light, our perception, like we could see photons coming in. You can see all things that's happening. Like you might not even have a perception of time. Like it could just be all like probability fields or something. Like who knows?
What are the trade-offs? That's a very interesting perspective. So plants could have a lower frequency consciousness, perhaps
over a long time.
Yeah,
so
that's gonna be my question. Is like, what are the trade-offs they're making? Because nervous system animals with nervous systems tend to, I guess, have shorter lives overall compared to
over 1,000 years, right? Some trees live 5,000 years, right? And it's not just one tree. Like you talk about the whole forest, like spirits in the forest. Like we know when like certain trees in one part of the forest gets like infected by some bacteria, whatever, message passes to the other end, and they start to develop like antibodies to fight off this stuff, right? So
it's one networked organism.
It may be if you speed it up, maybe it does have conscious, like, but it's just acting so slow in the time frame that we can't perceive it.
Right.
So it's similar to like if a computer has consciousness, or you have a program that has consciousness, like we could be the plant. We could be the plant. It's like it's imagine you ask a tree something. It takes like 10,000 years to respond. And that's like it's got to wait 10,000 years before we respond. In that time, it's done like a shit ton of thinking, right? This is why the AI doomers thinks we're doomed, because there's no way we can outsmart them, right? Like, but before everything we can think of, it's got like millions of years, the equivalent of million years of thinking about things, right? It's just running circles around us like it's nothing.
It's funny you jumped to the computer, because that was the analogy or the saying that came to mind. That there's the saying that the computer is the network, or the network is the computer. The computer really is just a collection of interconnections, basically. And that, basically there's 0 and 1 logic gates, right? At the machine language layer. And then you go up to another layer, I don't know, the software kernel, and then the software language, the applications. I might not be naming the layers correctly. But if you boil it all the way down, it's zeros or ones, yeses or nos, basically. And then that through this
similar
layer.
to our neurons, just firing.
Exactly.
Firing or not firing. Firing or not firing.
Exactly. Firing or not. So zeros or ones. And then, but when you layer it up, you get software applications, all right, which are
Yeah.
very sophisticated,
Yes.
complex. They
Yes.
don't look like zeros and ones at all. They're very
Yes.
adaptive. You know, we can use our imagination to create almost anything inside of software now, especially
Yes.
with things like AI image generators and LLMs and all of this, right? The imagination can sort of run wild. But at bottom, it's just this zeros and ones thing. So what is the so is it just the connections between these yeses and nos? Like how is it? The book by James Gleick, The Information, explained this well. I don't think I can articulate it here, but like, how is it we go from something so basic that's just yeses or nos to something that's very abstract?
I can give you an example. Like say this may or may not help. So you're seeing a screen here, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something, and when I'm like moving this mouse cursor, it looks like there's something moving, right? But there's nothing moving,
right?
All it is there's just a bunch of pixels, and it's time to change colors.
Right.
All it is pixels changing colors.
It's a timing illusion.
Yeah. So you imagine this machine that's just, you write this program that's well coordinated based on my input. It changes colors on these pixels.
Yes.
That's what's giving the illusion. And you can organize it in the way, like you can abstract models of it. Oh, there's a cursor. You can model all these things in for it to behave like this.
Yes.
I'm a software engineer by training. So it intuitively makes sense to me, but I can see how it feels like magic, right? Like zeros and ones, and you end up with all this stuff.
Right.
But you can actually drill every like the layers you talk about, every layer down, because there's so many levels of abstractions.
Right.
That by the time you get to like what we see, it feels like it's magic.
What's the purpose of the layered architecture? Like why couldn't we just do all this at layer 1, zeros and ones?
You can imagine like you're programming like individual pixels, but that's not efficient, right?
Okay.
Like it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Like imagine trying to time the pixel changes multiple times per second, and having it to know, like, how would you do it? The best way to do it is model what you want.
Yes.
And then in order to do the modeling, you would need to have abstractions.
And the abstraction then mask the complexity? Is that
yes,
sort of
that's
simple?
the point.
Okay.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So
that's the point
when
of layers.
when I write a program at the application level, I don't need to know anything about zeros and ones.
Right.
Even lower than that, like how quantum mechanics, how electric signal you get to.
In the same way, I don't even know how the combustion engine works when I press the gas pedal on my truck.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
That's all abstractions are.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so the capacity to have subjective experience. I guess we have to try and define the words subjective and objective. I've heard it put this way, that they're both
an experience. Whenever I say subjective experience, someone's like, define subjectivity and define experience.
Sure.
It's like, oh crap.
Yeah, and experience is like almost
what is
all
experience?
There is for a living organism, at least humans, I guess we would say. But even that, as you said, I can't verify that you're having experience, right? You could just be a NPC in the simulation that I'm in, something like that. There's no way. All I can say is
you could be dreaming. And everything you're hearing, everything you're seeing is just a result of your own brain creating these.
Yes. So the word subjective, objective, this might be an interesting gateway into metaphor, because I've heard it put that
maybe subjective isn't a good word now that I think of it. It's just having first person experience.
First person experience. Both of the words contain the word ject, J-E-C-T, which means to throw. Objective is to throw against something, and subjective, metaphorically, is to throw beneath. And so to throw against something is supposed to give you like a hard understanding of what it is, right? Like you've actually tested the surface for its solidity. Whereas when you throw something beneath an object, you get a deeper understanding of it, right? You see it from a deeper perspective. You get closer to its substance. So I'm throwing out the metaphorical interpretation of these words because, as we talked about earlier, metaphors seem to be pretty important. How do you said subjective maybe is not the best word, but how do we handle subjective, objective versus maybe first person?
Yeah, I don't think objective needs to be involved. Just because there is a duality that comes from subjective and objective, but I think in the context that we're talking about, it's more like internal and external, right? That's what I mean by maybe subjective isn't the best word, because I think it's trying to capture the within part versus
the without,
the out part, right? Like it's looking in versus looking out. Yeah.
But where's the boundary condition?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because you're talking about this earlier, like we're getting this constant inflow of sensory data or sensory information.
Signals.
Well, signals. Let's go with signals because I want to talk about information later. But and so we're like what we call perception, right? We think, oh, it's the surface of my eye that's receiving these photons. That's there's some moment, presumably the atomic surface of my eye.
Yeah.
When that photon goes from an external experience into an internal experience.
Well, so when the photon hits the retina, it'll create some like excitement. That energy of the photon transfers.
Yes.
It hits the retina.
It moves.
And it transfers some energy into the retina.
Yes.
And then now that energy gets like turned into like signal.
Yes.
It'll excite like neural pathway, like a signal gets sent down to your nerves, and then it'll excite a bunch of neurons.
Yes.
So that creates like this inflow. It's just boom, 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 boom. A bunch of those signals firing, right?
Effect,
And then your brain starts to process these signals and turns it into color.
Yeah,
that's it. That's
the experience like when of color.
That's what I call information processing. Same thing with sound. You got air molecules vibrating. Ultimately, it's like little hairs in your ear. They're vibrating, and these vibrations create energy that excites. Like there's Fourier transformation going on. It essentially turns like into signals, and ultimately your brain interprets.
So I asked you earlier too, I want to ask you again, the difference between that organic process of perception and something like a camera or a security camera or any device that records something. It could be an audio recorder, right? It too has certain signals.
It's got sensors that gets excited, and then electric signals goes in.
So what distinguishes that? I mean, it's not experience, presumably. What the camera is doing, how do we distinguish that from our first-person experience?
I think our eyes are like the camera.
Okay.
If you attach the camera to a computer and there's software running in the computer that does processing of the signals, like turns it into an image or does some interesting things with it, that'd be more like our brain taking the signal, doing some processing. But most of the time, when we get a feed and it shows up, it's doing like a mapping, a direct mapping of here's a signal, I map it to a bunch of colors, and you get the video feed.
Right.
You can call that processing, but not really.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's not the same kind of processing that our eyes are. Our brains are doing with the,
because it's less complex.
Yes. But
so is that just
but you can say you have a virtual person program in it. It's really taking into these signals coming in, and this program is like simulating some well, I have to assume, I'm making the hypothesis that consciousness emerges from information processing.
Okay.
So if say there's a brain simulator, right, and we're trying to simulate subjective experience, the way I would do it is have these signals come in and have this program process it like our brain, right? Like it'd be self-organizing neurons, and then these things firing in, and have it organized based on these things coming in, and it emerges. Like if this thing is like one component, and then it's able to like eventually develop speech or whatever, and it talks about it, like I would say that's conscious. That's like the same thing. This is exactly the same process.
Just a different level of
it's just a different
intensity.
Substrate. Yeah,
okay, different
and
substrate.
a different speed.
Yeah,
Probably.
different speed.
But when you're simulating it, you can dial the speed. But yeah, I get what you're asking. Like maybe it could.
Yeah.
Maybe it, I don't know. Right? Like
this is why it's a hard problem.
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
All right, let me ask you so that's like a calculational perspective on consciousness, right? That it is a computational process, I guess. Yeah, computational perspective on consciousness. But there's this other dimension, at least to human consciousness, presumably, that's more like contemplative, right? That when we step out. When that process steps outside of itself and examines its own process, right? Kind of like metacognition, right? When you're thinking about something and you're thinking about it in certain terms, but then you you reframe it in another way. There's a really interesting thing here called the frame problem that John Vervaeke often cites. Maybe we could pull that up actually on the computer at some point. Yeah. And he's just doing that to emphasize the way we often get stuck with problems because we frame them a certain way. So, and that's that inhibits calculational consciousness. But with contemplative consciousness, you can kind of step out of the frame and try on other frames to solve problems. This is where we get the phrase "think outside of the box." Actually, when you see the frame problem. Yeah. So, are there two different poles to consciousness? One calculational, one more contemplative. And if so, are machines? I guess that would be the big general artificial intelligence question, right? Is are machines capable of contemplation? Perhaps.
If it's just software, like under you can have the software to. I feel like it's one level higher, like. Like you can like awareness and gets into like self reflective, like all these things are sort of built on top,
so the higher layers,
so yeah, and everything is just software, so you could definitely, like if the machine is capable of having subjective experience, it's definitely capable of having everything else.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So then there is the possibility that humans could play God in a way.
Yeah. Definitely.
And we might be doing it right now with AI.
Yeah. Oh. There's this idea that like the end goal is, I mean, the whole point, the end goal is the universe trying to become conscious,
engage in self-reflection.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a long process.
Yeah.
It starts with certain animals, like biological things, becoming conscious. Yeah. And then they build machines, which becomes in the higher. Right. The machines will take over all of the universe, which then itself becomes consciousness. So we're in this. We're just in this little cog in the way how the universe ultimately wants to become alive and conscious. But I think I don't know. I think it's in some fiction. I'm not a science fiction reader, but I believe there's definitely books written based on that idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. This reminds me too. I think the book is The Origin of Wealth, where it talks about the algorithm of evolution, and it's pretty straightforward, right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it. Right? That's basically how evolution works, more or less. You know,
there's another way to think about evolution too.
Okay.
again, framing everything as software. It's not like survival of the fittest. On the organism level.
Yeah.
It's like these organisms are substrates to run software.
Sure.
And then there's these software that
the genes, basically.
Sort of through the genes.
Yeah.
Even the genes are part of the software. Like there are ways of organizing, be it molecules. So you start with like, this kind of goes against from like the free energy principle because we were talking about atom levels, but you can, one way I can kind of think of it is like atoms self-organized into molecules somehow.
Sure. Yeah.
Molecules self-organized into like proteins and all these different things, right?
Proteins self-organize into organelles, organelles into organs, organs into organisms, organisms into organizations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it could be, you could have planetary, and this is where the whole universe gets come. But my point is, these softwares, they start out just random, like just a bunch of stuff,
right?
And then somehow
something works.
And it sticks.
Yeah,
it is kind of survival of the fittest in that way, but it's just these software that are able to replicate. So one, this may be a good segue or not. Like money. If you think about money as a software, that like every culture ended up discovering money. It's this pattern. Yeah. If you think about software as a pattern,
it's a language. Yeah.
Yeah. We all, and same thing with government. Government, like once you have enough people, government ultimately forged, and it always does. It's because this. If you think of it as a software, this is the only pattern that survives. All other like fails. So this always stays. Yeah. And I think it's, you can think of evolution like that. So life like emerged because it survived.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's useful, but it also, you get back to like survival of the fittest in a way.
Yes.
Which if you reduce that down, it's survival.
It replicates.
Well, there's a saying in evolutionary biology that replicators replicate, which is a tautology, right? It defines itself, so it doesn't tell you anything. Or you could say survival of the fittest reduces to survival of the survivors, which also doesn't tell you much. Yeah. So
but this pattern is what like gets retained.
Yes, and I've seen this too, where they run simulations in. This isn't like evolutionary biology, but they'll run. They're like 2-dimensional schemas.
Game of life.
Exactly, game of life. Yeah.
You have very simple rules, and ultimately patterns emerge that are stable,
and they become stable over time.
Yes.
So, what I wanted to ask is, so there's that. I guess we'll leave the question of what does survival of the fittest mean on the table, because that is difficult. It's you also don't know what fittest means, right? Because context and circumstances are always changing. So in one scenario, maybe it's advantageous to have a long neck and eat leaves from a high tree, but a meteor hits the earth and all of a sudden it's advantageous to be a mammal that's hiding underneath the earth. That's how we survived the dinosaurs, presumably, right? The sun got blocked out, but we were subterranean, so we were able to generate our own heat and we survived. So leaving all that aside, perhaps, the algorithm of evolution is how nature appears to operate through a Darwinian lens. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it. And it seems like maybe this is the through line into sentience, at least human intelligence. We do the same thing in the marketplace with innovation, right? It's the same algorithm. You produce a product. If it works, if it solves people's problems better, faster, cheaper, well, then we keep it and the idea propagates. If it doesn't, well, you go to business and then that's that. So that same algorithm as you said earlier, it's not substrate dependent. It's substrate agnostic.
Right.
So the algorithm of evolution runs in a certain way through us, through blood, flesh, bone, claw, whatever. Yeah. But it also runs through material substrate that we work with, right? Silicon, plastic, whatever we create. So what is the question? Is that just what the universe is doing? Is it just one big algorithm propagating through different substrates?
Yeah. I like one question I think that puzzled a lot of like people in history, like what is matter? What is things? How do you define what is matter? Right. And then we have quantum mechanics people coming up with like boson fields and like it's this is a field and it's energy, and then there's information. It comes down to having information. This is why the whole universe is just this big. It's like an information theory lens of looking at the universe. Everything is information.
So it begs the question:
what is
information?
Yeah.
In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a Citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. We often, even when we say a term like information processing, that implies that information is somehow a noun or a thing that we're intaking and processing and then outputting something else. That's one way to interpret it, perhaps, but I like the interpretation of information as a verb rather than a noun. That it's, when the photons enter your eye or the signals enter any processing system, the signal itself is actually putting the system into a new formation, right? Like you change. Like when I look over here and I see you, and I look over here and I see the monitor, my internal state, if I'm a state,
the physical neurons actually
the physical neuronal state of my cognitive computer has changed when I change my viewpoint. So perhaps information is just this verb that describes what reality is doing, that it's constantly in flux, interacting with itself. There's a ubiquity of signaling occurring, and it's always, because the one thing that doesn't change so far as we can tell is change itself. in physical reality, that it's constantly putting itself into new formations. And then maybe that's what gives, just like the game of life you mentioned earlier, occasionally it gives rise to useful patterns.
Exactly.
That somehow, because then if you get to us, the innovator, that we take the algorithm of evolution, but we use it in a different way than nature. Like evolution's very slow and conservative, right? It takes a long time. But evolution's not going to create a 747 airliner, for instance, right? It'll create a bird. It'll create a flying dinosaur, whatever it may be, but it's not going to create a 747. You needed someone to like think about physics and materials and jet fuel and like put all these things together in a recipe and create it. So it takes like these giant leaps across design space that are higher risk, but also higher reward. Whereas evolution seems to be very like it moves methodically and with
biological.
It's contiguous movement through design space versus these giant leaps that we take as technological innovators.
Yeah, and I can see like once artificial or like sentience or consciousness ends up on the silicon substrate, there might be another similar leap.
Right. Exactly.
Things happen totally
right
in a different way because they have a different understanding of the universe. And the laws. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I see it as just
layers.
Or leaps of patterns that emerged that are superior, that ultimately like rises up, and then the former one just subsides because it's not as efficient or inferior, however
not
you measure it.
As efficient at reducing surprise. Is that like maximizing knowledge, something like that? Like,
or ultimately we're fighting entropy.
Yes.
Right. So trying to contain order, like for as long as possible.
Trying to map order.
Like you as a person, you're made out of trillions of cells, and it's like an ecosystem, right? There's 3 times more bacteria than cells in the body, and it's like everything is kind of doing its own things, but the way that they're doing it organizes into you as a person.
Yes.
And somehow there's a consciousness that emerged in the neuron somehow. But my point is like I actually lost my train of thought. Sorry. How do we get here?
My question was somewhat about, is the universe just this algorithm running the algorithm of evolution?
Right. That we went over true. But what did we say just before?
And then maybe this will spark it or for you. When you describe us as an ecology or an ecosystem of cells, at some point, all of those, let's call them microorganisms as a catch-all for cells, bacteria, whatever it may be, they become organized under one autonomy, basically, right? There's one self, right? That your aims and your purposes and your desires, all of a sudden your body serves that.
I think what I was going to say was before I sidetracked, I think I sidetracked into like this thing is all like, separate, but it's like the software retains it's what the software that kept everything together is the software that propagates. It's So I remember we're talking about like next levels, right?
Yeah.
Like being more efficient,
Yeah.
being so there's one set of rules that's keeping this ecosystem as one entity, right? But you can imagine there are other ones that have totally different systems, right? Like different plants, different animals, they all have their own way of retaining a whole bunch of cells or as an ecosystem, right? And then they sort of all compete for resources and whatnot. But you can think of it as different software running inside competing for maximal replication, right?
So
Then when you get to the AI, maybe it doesn't need to have like robot limbs to consume resources. Maybe it does. Maybe it may, like, however more efficient, because they have a better understanding of the universe. That's what I'm talking about. Right. Yeah.
So if, are we saying then that the teleology or purpose of evolution is efficiency, that we're trying to become more efficient with the use of resources? Because if so, maybe, but doesn't that presuppose an aim or a purpose or a target? Because, you could be really efficient at doing one thing, but inefficient at another.
The efficiency thing comes from like competition.
Yeah.
And if you think of, the Darwinian thing is like things competing for resources. So the ones that can have the most resources.
So these are different algorithms are competing for resource.
These are different algorithms competing for computation, essentially. So you have all the different kinds of, like, think about the game of life. They're doing their things, different patterns.
Yes.
Each pattern, you think of it as a software.
Yeah.
And the thing that they're competing for is just being there. Existing.
Yeah, right.
And that's what it is.
Yeah.
And our software, like, it's trying to maximize the fight against entropy.
Yeah.
So the more organized you are, the longer it'll take entropy to decompose you, essentially.
Which is, okay, I always like this little, I don't know what this is, a vignette, I suppose, about describing the relationship between entropy, energy, and uncertainty. If you have a chamber, like a metallic chamber, and there's a partition down the middle of it, and you have all the gas molecules trapped in one half of that chamber.
Okay.
Right? And the other half of the chamber is vacuum. There's nothing in it, right?
There's something splitting.
There's a partition in the middle. Yep. It's all metal, right? Metal sphere, metal plate in the middle. All the gas is on one side, vacuum on the other side.
Okay. We
have more knowledge about the location of those gas molecules with a partition in the middle, right? Because, if it were in the whole thing, we'd have less knowledge because there's more space for the gas molecules to disperse within. But when we partition it and have all the gas molecules on one side, we have more information or less entropy, basically, about that gas. Now, if we remove that partition, as the gas fills the rest of the space, there's a release of energy, actually. You can actually harness the energy from removing that partition. The trade-off is you now have this chamber with more entropy, right? There's less certainty about the position of the gas molecules after you've removed the partition. So with more certainty, or information, you basically have potential energy, basically. But once you remove that partition, you have less certainty about the location of the gas molecules. You have less information and therefore less potential energy. So how does, when you say we're fighting against entropy, we still haven't really defined information, but they seem to be like almost two sides of the same coin, right? If you have information, then you are somehow guarded against entropy, right? If I know how to build a campfire when I'm naked and lost in the woods, I know the recipe for building a campfire. Well, then that's information that's going to protect me from the entropy of nature. If I don't have that knowledge, then I'm probably going to die that night. So what is the relationship between information and entropy?
Before I answer, I want to go back to the sphere thing, right? I think with molecules, what you're talking about is pressure, right?
Absolutely.
You have
higher pressure.
You have
on one
less
side.
volume.
Yes.
There's
Content
less,
per unit
yeah.
volume is pressure. Yes.
But I don't
or density.
I don't necessarily think there's less information or more entropy.
Well, there's
it's
definitely more
the same-
certainty where they are. I mean, because you know they're in one half of the chamber versus the whole chamber. So if you're going to locate
but that
any,
doesn't necessarily mean there's more or less entropy, right?
well,
It
first of all,
comes from order.
So
So imagine they're not gas molecules, or imagine they're
it could be anything. It could be marbles, right? Yeah.
could be marble. So
Yeah.
say it's just one marble. You create the space. It's still one marble. It's the same amount of organization. Like that didn't change.
All right, so
Like it's got the same amount of entropy fighting. Like for the marble to decay into like a bunch of bunch of free floating atoms, right? That or even more particles, like completely get destroyed into like particles. There's no, you lost the information of the marble, right? The marble is completely gone.
let's stick with gas molecules because marbles.
But it's the same thing.
Well, marbles would settle to the bottom, right? If they were in one half, then they would just settle to the bottom. Whereas the gas is,
But the position doesn't
evenly
matter.
distributed, basically.
Sure.
So this example comes from the book from 1970s, I think, Introduction to Information Theory, and that's the example he gives, and that's the one I've always used as
I
like
see.
a good example to understand the relationship between information, entropy, and energy, or potential energy, I guess you could say. I mean, it seems obvious to me. I hope maybe I'm missing something here, but if you do have that gas partition into one side of the chamber, you've cut the search space in half, basically.
Sure.
If you're looking for the position of any one gas
true.
molecule, the search space is now reduced by half, so therefore your odds of finding it are doubled.
Yeah.
Right.
That is true.
Yeah. So that's what that's what
That's
the
what you
author
mean.
is getting at in the way that I understood it.
Okay. But I guess it's my mental model. It could be just me not knowing information theory.
We could scrap the example, but like, what is your view then on the relation? We're still trying to like we boiled it all the way down and said it's all information.
Yeah.
We didn't really distinguish, well, is it a verb? Is it a noun? I don't know. But so I'm hoping to tease out more of what information is by comparing it to entropy or contrasting it to entropy.
I think to me, it's almost like a substitute for like the most fundamental particle, or like if we're looking for something like that, like how does, like, what does matter? Like you keep cutting it down, right? Like you talk about things being solid, but our understanding is atom is mostly
Empty space.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a force field that's pushing back
Right.
against the atoms in your hand.
Yeah.
That's what creates this feeling of solid, right?
Yes. And even those particles have some
And then you
particles.
break down into like, okay, mostly a vacuum, and then in the center we know there's a
Proton,
nucleus.
neutron,
But then what is in
quarks.
that?
Yeah.
Then it's all mostly empty space.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then what goes down?
Yes.
And then ultimately in the end, it's there's the field. We have something.
Yeah.
Just this information of having something versus not. But then
Yes.
I just use information to define something.
Yeah. No.
So my point is, I think my mental model, which could completely be wrong, it is that fundamental thing. That's I think how I would.
So there's a fundamental entity or elementary particle of information in your view.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It is the fundamental thing that gives rise to things.
Yes. It's also defined as information is also defined as surprise.
Yes.
So is it just this inherent unpredictability of the complex system that is the universe that gives it this informational quality, that it's just always yielding surprises to us? The future is always uncertain.
I mean, we can't know, right?
Yeah.
Like these are,
Which is entropy. Like, we can't know. I was like, that's
yeah,
a confession of entropy in a way.
Yes. And I was mentioning to the other guys, like we come up with these models. Like we that's like what our brains do best.
Right.
We see patterns in things and then we create a model.
Yeah.
But our model is all based on the input that we receive. So we're limited by our input.
Right.
Like I was talking about ChatGPT. Like if the model is formed based on all the pre-training data it got.
Yes.
And then if you eliminated a bunch of data from a certain type, then it wouldn't know anything about that. So like we have no idea what the universe is, like the physical out there.
Right.
All we have is like what we can empirically, but it's also just very subjective.
Yes.
Everything is subjective.
Yeah. So
it could just be the tip of the iceberg. Like one example I like to use is like so there's like these programs that you can run on the camera and then recognize things, right? Like security camera recognizing people, or license plates. You can read license plates. Like you would think these programs have a model of the universe, so it knows, okay, this is a person, that's a car, it's a license plate, letter, like similar to how we recognize things, right? But then when you see things like there's like people that come up with hacks where they put a QR code on their face or they just hold up a QR code, the program goes bonkers. Like it like destroys the way it's able to recognize. Not like when we see it, we just see a person holding up a QR code.
Yeah. Just
but that QR code fucks up the program completely. So that's an indication of whatever the model it is, it's so different than what we have. But if you didn't know about this QR code, you would think, hey, it's got the perfect model that matches ours because everything you show it's seeing.
Right.
But that's just like the tip of the iceberg, right? Like there could be like that model could be so different from like how we have it. Yeah. And just based on the fact that you can throw it off by having this QR code. Yeah. So it's similar how we like perceive universe. Right. Like you can talk about all these different models, entropy, how even information,
just
how
models.
Like who knows?
Even
like,
the particle that you bring up is. So my interpretation of this would be I tend to agree that information is ontologically primary, but understood as a verb, as I was saying earlier, not as a noun per se. That it's this process, like the whole.
Why make that distinction? Like to me, it seems like it's
because
unnecessary.
It implies when you say that. When you look at information as a noun and you talk about information processing, it implies that there's something ontologically prior to the information that's doing the processing. Whereas the information itself being the process, the information is the verb, is the process, is reality. It's like it's ontologically primary.
Sure, I see. Yeah, it's the same thing.
It's subtle.
It's just labels at that point.
Yeah, it's
like,
subtle.
It's like you can. it's essentially, I call it information processing, and you just want to call it information.
Information is a process. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, this is just labels.
That's
as long as we understand what we're talking about,
information is
you can have
processing,
whatever
basically.
labels you want on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's interesting. Then maybe what I was going to get at there was the particle itself. Now I'm drawing from a book, The Dancing. It sounds ridiculous. The Dancing Wu-Li Masters, I think, but it's a book on quantum mechanics, and he argues that actually that reality is this continuous field of interaction, right? Wave interactions, basically, and then we assign the model or the construct of particle to certain forms of those wave interactions. So a proton is a certain type of wave interaction. A neutron is a different type of wave interaction. Quarks, gluons, the whole particle zoo basically are just descriptive models or boxes or frames we've put around, energetic liquid plasma interactions basically. And that lands for me because like when I look at reality, it's like that's how it seems to actually work. Like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? Everything's always bi-directional, right? In biology, it's feedback loops.
I mentioned Stephen Wolfram. He's been talking about Rouliads and what was the other
a bunch of other new words, right?
Thermodynamics, like how essentially his is Wolfram physics. Yeah. His latest sort of greatest answer to everything. And it's all about like everything's computational, which gets into information. Right. And then it needs to be computable. And so the Rouliad is essentially, this is my understanding, which obviously could be wrong. It's like all possible computations. Like if you think in terms of design like mathematics, it definitely exists. Like in the world of mathematics, right? There's different kinds of numbers. You can think about sets, different rules, whatever. There definitely exists this thing that's like all possible computable space. And he has this whole thing with like graphs and how like basically came up with a rule that maps back to quantum mechanics and relativity and like through this graph, like just things happening on the graph maps to all these things and it explains the universe as we observe it perfectly. That's I mean when I saw him explain this in the video, it was like that makes perfect sense, right? Like I think there's going to be so many different kinds of models that matches our experience. That I don't know if they're really compatible. They might be all incompatible, right? But they all match, and we just like I said, we have no idea. Because we can only observe one space like that. Like if all we had to judge like whether the program is working is based on like its recognition of things, then could be a million multiple ways of achieving that. Sure. And what is the right way out there? Right. We have no idea. No. Right.
That's
until you find the QR code that proves the other thing wrong. Like there's just no way to know.
What you just described, scientific method in a nutshell, right? It's like create hypotheses, disprove whatever you can, whatever you can't disprove is science, basically. It's never actually, anyone that says scientifically proven doesn't understand how science works. It's scientifically not disproven, basically. That's what you have.
That's why everything is a theory. All the people who work in hard science wants to disprove and well-established theory. That's how you win like Nobel Prizes.
That's how you get on top. Until you get supplanted in the future. Exactly. So language then, like, because you said something sort of interesting there, like it almost doesn't matter what semantic labels we use. I mean, I agree, but then I
just
also
meant to me, like
here's why I get tripped up though. This is a tricky one for me. I would agree. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, we could call this thing, water, or we
Yeah.
can call it agua. Like,
Yeah.
like whatever. As long as we both have consensus on the
Right.
terminology, then we can mind meld basically through language.
Exactly.
If we break that consensus, we cannot. So in one sense, it doesn't matter. It's arbitrary, like what label you select. But then in another sense, if we're talking about consciousness being this, the flow of information that is accurate, right? That there's a high fidelity from the message sender to the message recipient, right? Like there's not information loss in the messaging process.
There's always information loss.
There's always information loss.
We want to minimize.
Want to minimize information loss, right? Want to maximize data throughput, something like that.
Yes.
In that sense, like it does really matter what terms we use, right? Like this probably gets into the domain of mathematics. It's like
it doesn't.
We can use this. We can use a numeral 6 based system, or let's say something simpler. A numeral system with no number 0. Right? Like we can use that. That's what Roman numerals are. Yeah. But they're very inefficient at performing calculations. So then therefore they inhibit merchants that are trying to do accounting and transactions and whatnot. So it gets out competed by the superior strategy, which is a 0-based numeral system, or the Hindu-Arabic numeral systems.
Yes.
So there is a quote unquote right language, right? Like Hindu-Arabic numerals are more right than Roman numerals.
It's fundamentally different. It's a number system with 0 and without.
Yes.
Is fundamentally different.
Is one better or worse?
Depends on what you're trying to optimize as better or worse, right? Like what is the goal? So my point
isn't the goal information throughput, as you said earlier?
Sure. If it is, then yes, one is better than the other, right? But there is fundamental. My point is there's something fundamentally different between a number system with 0 and without, because they're not compatible. You have this 1 0 that doesn't map to anything in the other one.
Exactly.
But what we're talking about with labels, we're assuming. So imagine like the Chinese numbers and the Arabic numbers. There's zeros, but they're written differently.
Sure.
But as long as you map,
conceptually
there's a map of there's this actual thing that we all understood mutually. Okay, this means 0 circle. And then in Chinese, it's like some crazy symbol.
The concept independent of the symbol.
Right.
The specific
so that's
symbol.
the label, right? That doesn't matter. It's what we are really interested in is the substance.
Yes.
And as long as there's a one-to-one mapping in the case of water or information and versus information processing, then I don't see a problem there.
Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLF, nyc.com. As one of my business mentors once told me, the job of the boss is to eliminate confusion. The best antidote for confusion is access to truth, which brings clarity to business decision-making and thus optimizes the drive toward future business goals. Over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP system, which brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make decisions quickly and effectively. If I was still a CFO, NetSuite is undoubtedly the ERP system I would use in my business. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, you can download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/whatismoney. This guide is packed with useful insights and is free for you at netsuite.com/whatismoney. Again, that's netsuite.com/whatismoney. Okay, so language then
equivalent.
is the symbolic layer or the conceptual layer?
Language, like when we say language, like natural language,
Yeah.
it's just very vague. It covers like what humans use.
Yeah.
And that's everything.
Right.
Right. You can get into like formal language, which is more like a computer programming language.
Yes.
And that's it gets into like how expressive it is.
Yes.
And there are certain things you can express with natural language
Right.
that's not really possible with
mathematics.
with
Right.
It depends on how complicated
Sure.
the language itself is. But there's definitely different tiers of language. Like if you study linguistics, this is all like pretty standard stuff. Like there, you can have a very simple language that doesn't have, say, support like recursion, which is like I say something and then I make a reference of it again.
No self-reference.
Yeah. And then that would limit in what you can express, right?
Yes,
so there's all these different classes of languages, but yeah, I think for information in terms of like most information retained and maximum minimize loss and maximize like information being retained and transferred.
Yes.
You want to not have ambiguity, right?
Right.
And usually formal language works better in that sense because natural language almost always have some ambiguity.
Well, you're always
but you can establish it. And then like again, it's never going to be perfect because the process of establishing, there's also loss.
Exactly.
There's always loss. So it's like it's super inefficient for me to have a thought, have these things get into your head.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to deconstruct it, turn it into words, which is produced by my vocal cord vibrating air molecules getting into your ear's hair vibrating, and then you decode those vibrations into some concept.
Yes.
The end result is probably kind of different than what I have.
Of course.
Right?
Almost always.
Like as soon as it leaves, even me putting it into words is already like the words already.
There's already data compression.
Different. I had to sort of compress or change it.
Right.
So it's. This is why Elon wants the Neuralink thing, right? You want mind straight.
You're opening the strictures between human minds, between connecting human minds.
Yeah, this process is so inefficient, right? This is me describing, thinking about this is like the worst way to like send information, but this is all we got. This is the best thing we have.
Yeah, and maybe
writing it down is a little bit better.
Well, and sometimes, I was going to say, because sometimes going slow, it's trade-offs, right? If Neuralink worked, we could obviously transmit information with much higher speed, efficiency, throughput, all those things. But then there's, when I sit down with a pen and I write long form, I'm capable of saying things and formulating thoughts and ideas and stories that I can't just extemporize. So by going more slowly, you gain this other capacity.
I suspect that bandwidth is like Elon's thing is about increasing bandwidth between like he's like 2 thumbs typing on the keyboard.
I know.
Too slow, right? Like it's worse. And he wants to increase that bandwidth.
Yeah.
It's like speech is much better because you use a bunch of words, right? Like, but then with the Neuralink, it's going to be even crazier, right?
Yes.
But I suspect the bandwidth isn't the problem. Like even if you, like you said, have a crazy bandwidth, you still have a processing problem. Like you can't keep up with that. Like you just dumps a bunch of words. You can't like even just someone speaking too fast. It's hard to understand, right?
Right.
Like,
of course.
So I think we're still bounded by interpretation.
Always.
Right.
Always. That's what I was going to point to next. Was
And the pen writing gives you time to process.
Gives you time,
And gives you because we process things pretty slowly.
That's what it is. Maybe it's slowing down the expression, which brings it more in line with the speed of cognition.
Yeah,
So therefore you can form bigger, more complex thoughts.
I would agree with that.
Albeit at a lower speed, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that makes sense.
So interesting. Okay, I want to ask you, ambiguity is such an interesting concept though, because like we want minimal ambiguity in our speech, right? Which is another way of saying we want very high terminological consensus, right? When I invoke a word, what I mean when I invoke that word is what you mean when you decrypt the word, basically, right? That's ideal.
Yeah.
But so that's great for things that we, I guess parts of reality that have been mapped by language. But for parts of reality that have not been created yet, right? New tools, new stories, new whatever, we run into ambiguity inescapably, right?
Yeah.
So when you think of something like when the internet was emerging, we called it things like the information superhighway, right? We're metaphorizing it, this new construct in terms of something that we all sort of understand. We say things like, oh, that's a feature, not a bug. Now we say that about, people's personalities or something in a business, but really it's just like a metaphorical, it's gone the other direction, right? We've taken our experience with digital technology. Now we import that into social reality to talk about stuff. So there's this, the ambiguity seems like a necessary aspect of dealing with novelty, basically, until you go forward in time and you map that thing with less ambiguity, you get a more solid foundation, and that frees you up to go and pursue
it's a consensus
further
problem.
novelty. Yes,
it's a consensus problem.
Exactly.
Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Exactly, which is ultimately a language problem in a way, or an interpretation problem. We still haven't defined language well.
You have to have consensus.
Yes.
This is why we established, like when we said information versus information process, let's mentally map them as labels to the same thing.
Yes.
We form consensus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So everyone else in the world needs to make that same mental gymnastics that we did. On our level. Then consensus is established, and we can just use, be it information or information process, whatever.
Yes.
Everyone would be able to agree. But it takes a long time to have consensus.
Amen to that. And so I want to ask you then, what's special about mathematics? Because that does seem to be I think Galileo called it the language of the universe, or the language of nature, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is the language in which we have the strongest consensus on Earth today, so far as I know.
It is discovered.
It is discovered. Okay, so it is. There's a latent mathematicness to reality, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Because the ideas exist, I think, regardless, and it's like aliens or whatever, they should be able to discover it the same way.
Right.
They might have a totally different, but I think they will have numbers.
Yes.
I think numbers are discoverable.
Yes.
And just the idea of having quantities, assigning a label or value to each quantity. And I don't know. I almost, that comes from, it's also part of our universe.
That's okay.
But it's like the information part.
Yes.
It's like numbers, computations, right? This is why that's the fundamental thing.
So it's could it be? Now this is like, I'm so glad we're going here. This is like one of my biggest philosophical questions. Could it be that, because mathematics has evolved over time, right? Like we already mentioned the Roman numerals, for instance, a non-zero based numeral system. There was a Babylonian cuneiform, which was like base 6. You know, that's actually the one that I think that included 0 originally, and later became the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong. Anyways, mathematics have evolved over time as we have discovered more numbers. We'll say numbers are the latent part of reality, whereas numerals are the symbol that map that concept. And we're asserting here, hypothesizing, that the number is a conceptual reality. It exists independent of the perceiver, right? That an alien race could discover it.
Right.
But mathematics has evolved over time, right? We discovered 0, we discovered imaginary numbers, we've discovered, irrational numbers, prime numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that discovery process have a terminal point? And if it did, would that be like the primordial language of reality? Like if we actually, maybe like the software code of reality, like cosmic software code. I know this is way down off the deep end, but I just thought about that before, how mathematics is evolving. It's the primary consensus language. Does it have a terminal point? If it did have a terminal point, what would that mean or be?
I think of math like, or the what you call the evolution or of math. It's just discovering more things, right?
I guess the question, and framed that way, is there a bottom? Is there a bottom to that discovery process or an end point?
A lot of times those discoveries they came from, like you said, complex numbers. They came from a necessity.
Yes.
Yes. Also calculus was invented out of necessity.
Yes.
Like it's like there's a problem, and you want a way to solve it.
Yes.
And the way you mapped it, you inevitably discovered new mathematics.
Yes.
It's almost like
same with game theory. Game theory invoked new mathematics.
You create. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if it's like infinite. I would think. Like what Wolfram was talking about, you can have a system that contains all possible computation. So you could have a system that's composed of all possible mathematics too, I suppose.
How does that reconcile with infinity? Because isn't infinity a real number?
Infinity doesn't exist in the physical world we observe, but it is a concept that we can imagine. But
so that's
like the world is discrete as far as we can tell.
Discrete.
Yeah, meaning it's not continuous.
Really?
And continuity is what infinity requires.
So that's an atomistic view of the universe, right? That there's a fundamental particle, but as you said earlier, that's
more and more that is, I think, the consensus of like physics and science community.
This is where I think science is deeply wrong. I don't think there is a fundamental model. But I am still very...
The current model is mostly like discrete. Because there's a saying, I think, infinity is just like a number that's too big for us to comprehend. Or basically, when we get to a number that like it's too big, we just get lazy and we call it infinity. But there's
infinity infinities, by the way, right?
Sure, different levels of it. But those are just things we can think about, but it doesn't map to real world.
Well, that's divorced from what we said earlier about mathematics, though, that it is this numeral system maps to something in reality, but
observable. So what we, when I say real is like our current like consensual model of the physics and all.
Right.
But like I said, that's just what we see.
The space
right?
of shared imagination.
Right, like what we can observe based on empirical stuff.
Right.
But underneath all that, like what is out there, there's
Yeah.
it might as well exist, right?
Yeah.
That I would agree. Like if you say like
Okay.
outside of what we can observe, like we just see a tip of iceberg, which is discrete,
Right.
But underneath how it,
Yes.
that no one knows, right? Then sure, it might as well be continuous.
I have to ask you this. This is kind of jumping ahead, but
Over.
Karl Friston's quote: "The anatomy of every system must contain a model of the system in which it is immersed." I might be paraphrasing that to some extent, but it's kind of like getting at the old alchemical dictum of "as above, so below."
Yeah.
Right. That also fractal mathematics. Right. Things tend to be self-similar but non-repeating at different levels. You know, a pebble looks like a stone, looks like a mountain, basically, right? Structurally, they're similar, but they're vastly different scales. If that's the case, and we've had a hard time kind of defining language, I think. Like we've got mathematics as a language, money as a language, natural language as a language. Some people might say music is a language. There's body language, you know, all kinds of things. Does that...
I didn't know we were trying to define language, but sure.
Oh, sorry. There was a question earlier. I would love... Well, you could answer that as well.
Yeah.
Mathematics, money, body language, sign language, natural language, music, you know, there's other things I think that could be considered linguistic. If as above, so below, or Karl, which is expanded upon by Karl Friston, which I won't repeat again, if that's the geometric or structural nature of reality, does that mean reality itself, the fabric of reality, could be language or language-like? And that's what that also ties back into what we were saying earlier about information, and that also ties into Genesis in the Bible and many other wisdom traditions.
I think at this point, language, the label, the word language, it's taking on probably it's kind of getting overloaded. I think we need to narrow down a definition or come to consensus of what is language.
Signaling system of some kind.
No, to you is that?
Well, I'm throwing out a proposal.
When you say language, what do you think?
No, this is why I'm asking, honestly, because I mean I'm writing about this and it's very broad, right? I actually do.
No, but you must have a.
I think my intuition is that, and probably informed by my Christian upbringing, right? In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. I'm not saying that correctly. There is the logos, right? The sacred logos. So there is a language-like structure to reality. And I think I mean, again, all I can invoke is the modern metaphor that's available to me, but software is probably the best metaphor we've got, right? It's the best metaphor for describing human cognition. And if we are, you know, as again, the Bible teaches that we are made in the image of God, as above, so below, then maybe it is the logo. The universe is logos. The universe is language, divine language. And that ties to my earlier question about mathematics, because like if there's a terminal point in that process, maybe we could discover the ancient language or the primordial language and actually, who knows? I don't know what happens then. But anyways, these are my philosophical meanderings.
I think one sidetrack, talking about the Bible, Yosha Bach has a really good speech about tying like software consciousness to Genesis. How he thinks Genesis is a little bit mistranslated, and when you substitute like the word water for substrate, you can see how substrate gets mistranslated to water.
Of course. Yeah.
And then what Genesis is actually explaining is not God creating the world, but how consciousness comes to be. It's a fascinating topic.
Maybe
I can show you the link.
Yeah. Actually,
do you want to see it now? But it's
oh, sorry. Go ahead. But and then
we can talk about language too.
We have some things to pull up. Yeah. No.
I mean, but it's long. It's a pretty long.
Go on with as far as you want with the answer to the question, and then after that, let's pull some stuff up because I have some clips too I want to share.
Okay, sure.
But please continue.
Yeah, so for what you're talking about, language being money, language being all these different things, it's almost like a metaphor to me. Like when I think of language, I think of more like it's a collection of labels. It's the means for people to come to consensus. Like like there's a bunch of labels. Everyone, let's agree these labels describe certain things. That's
but mathematics,
all that is.
But mathematics, as you said earlier, if it's number and we're discovering something in reality, it is still labeling, but it's not arbitrary labeling. It's almost like
no, you still use so in mathematics
the individual label is arbitrary, but the structural connection between labels is non-arbitrary.
Yeah, so there you can think of mathematics as things we discover. We've came up with a set of labels to describe those things,
to map that conceptual landscape.
Yeah, and that's sort of like the language of mathematics, all the different symbols you see in math, and but that like saying mathematics is a language. I think it's metaphor in the sense that the substance of mathematics is universal, like computation is universal. And
is contemplation universal?
It could just be a side effect of computation. So there's this idea of like Turing complete computation. If a machine is Turing complete, then it can run the same program. That any other Turing complete machine can run. So it doesn't matter like how primitive, different speeds, you're always going to be able to perform the same. Maybe at different speeds, but same program. There's the same logic is able to execute. It's kind of like there's a space of what can be described in the language, and as long as what you're trying to describe fits in this space, then it doesn't matter what kind of labels you have. You'll be able to describe the same thing. So like Japanese, English, Chinese, they can all describe the same thing, just because they have the same expressiveness.
Right.
So for mathematics, it's called the universal language, not because it's really a language. It's more like because it goes across space. It doesn't require it's an idea. It doesn't require like being on Earth. It doesn't. Anybody across the universe can discover this. So then, if we were to communicate with an alien, our best tool is mathematics
across space, across time.
Sure. Yeah. So like, I don't think it's language in the literal sense that it's a collection of labels, but it's because the universality of it. It allows two completely different civilizations to communicate because they have this thing in common.
It's beautifully said. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-key vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control over your keys. Your funds are fully auditable on chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or be withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If we can find John Vervaeke on the 9-dot problem.
Okay, so do you remember we did the 9-dot problem, right? We talked about that. Remember the fact that you can misframe things. So let's do the 9-dot problem again. Join all 9 dots with 4 straight lines, and people find it difficult. Why? Remember, we talked about this. They automatically, listen to the words. Remember, they automatically and unconsciously project a square there. And then they automatically take this to be a connect the dot problems, and so no non-dot turns are possible. And therefore, they can't get the solution. The solution is here's 4 straight lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason why people find that so difficult is I have to break the square, and I have to not treat it as a typical connect the dot problem. I have to not treat it categorically, to use language you've heard already.
You got to think intercategorically.
Because you don't do non-dot turns. Remember this. Now notice there's
ambiguity.
2 moments to having an insight. I have to break up an inappropriate frame. What do I have to do? I have to break up the gestalt. Right?
I think you could stop it here.
And I also...
I get it.
Yeah. So yeah, there's frame breaking and frame making as a process of rationality that, we want the knowledge to be made very strongly in a way that can't be broken, but we also need to have this process of creative destruction, of frame breaking inappropriate frames to move forward, right? Newton was right, but in a lower resolution way than Einstein was right.
Yeah.
From mechanical billiard ball universe into a relativistic universe, right? So it's, anyways.
Yeah.
And that's why I think metaphor is so instrumental, by the way, because you
I think
talk
of it
about
the other
new
way
things
around.
in terms of old things.
Like it worked, like Newtonian physics worked up till the point where it didn't work. And then people were like, okay, let's come up with an explanation for this. And Einstein did was relativistic. But like I said, that could still just be a face of the iceberg where you can still find a QR code you throw up and it completely breaks. This is why we can't have quantum mechanics be compatible with relativity. Like we know for sure that is not correct, because if it were, all those little things that we're seeing at the particle level, it doesn't apply. And that's so obviously it's wrong. It's a simplified model.
It's wrong at a certain scale. We haven't figured out how to
it's
apply
wrong
it
in
at
the
a scale.
sense it's
Yes.
not universal. It
Yes.
only applies to certain things, just like
Yes.
Newton's only applied to things that moved really slowly.
Yes, but
Yeah.
okay. So let's take that then. If someone discovers a way to reconcile general and special relativity, I think was it
General and real is already.
Well, no,
Einstein
no,
did that.
No. To
Quantum
reconcile
mechanics.
relativity
And quantum-
broadly with quantum mechanics.
Yeah, and
Would
a lot
that-
of people have done that.
Has it been fully reconciled?
They all have like string theory is
Yeah,
the way
sure.
in the mathematic way, but it
Yeah.
doesn't lead to predictions.
Right.
So we know
So it's not
that's
practical.
wrong in the sense that sure the math works out, right? They
Right.
figured out the math that
But it
match
doesn't,
that
doesn't empirically.
right. It doesn't
Yeah.
predict anything.
Gotcha.
And similar to the like Wolfram physics,
Mm-hmm.
his thing completely explains both relativity and quantum mechanics. But it's so new, he hasn't made any predictions.
Right,
We don't know.
right.
And likewise, other physicists, that's what they all want to work on. And
Yes.
I'm sure they start with the math. They come up with a system of math. At least the math has to work out.
Well, sometimes, but Newton had to invent calculus.
right.
Sometimes you have to invent a whole new branch of math because it doesn't work for the problem.
He-
You got to frame break an entire branch of mathematics, or not break. I guess you're making in that case.
It's more like if he didn't invent it, someone else would have. Because
Yes.
everyone is
'Cause he
facing
discovered
this
it.
problem of
Yeah.
doing integration
Yes.
and like
Differentials.
So they
Yeah.
have to do it. And
So that's interesting. So then, does the industrial age spark the discovery of calculus? Because we needed to deal with complex movements in machines and things like that. 'Cause that's what calculus is the mathematics of movement, largely, right?
I think it's more curiosity. Like people are doing experiments, and they're trying to come up with models and come up with equations that explain things. And ultimately, you're going to run into this problem. I want an equation
Yes.
that
Predicts.
that can do this, and it's increasingly difficult. This is one of the Wolfram thing. His thing with Wolfram physics is about computational universality of computation. Like he's saying, basically, anytime we can we can predict where a planet is, like centuries from now, based on the model we
Yeah,
have.
even
we
with
can just,
Newtonian physics. Yeah.
yeah, we have this model. We just plug in the number and boom comes out the answer. There's a full understanding of how things works, and he's saying that's usually wrong. Whenever it doesn't work, and he's saying if you want the precision, like at any scale, you have to do each step. Like you have to let the computations play out.
You got to play the game.
You can't just. It's like the blockchain. You can't get to the next blockchain without getting to the previous one, and you can't get to the previous one until it goes all the way to create the whole chain. You have to go from the beginning,
Right.
and the only way you can get to the next one is the last one is by going through the work to
So
get to the
time is a blockchain.
How did he explain
Satoshi
time? I
called-
forgot. His like time is the propagation of this graph or something like
Wow.
that. I forgot.
You know, Satoshi called it a time chain, by the way. He never used the
really?
term blockchain.
Makes sense.
Someone perverted that.
I
So
like
that's an
the
interesting
segue of
connection.
getting into blockchain.
I don't want to segue into that.
Okay.
Either. I want to ask you then, does that make predictive power the ultimate power? I mean, that's what defines a theory. That's what makes a strategy winning.
For our, I think, current like observable universe and science, like the only way we're kind of validating theories is based on prediction. Like if you can make a prediction
Right.
with your theory,
Yeah.
here's the formula,
Yeah.
plug in some numbers, it should be this result. You go do it,
Yeah.
and it gets this result.
Does it have to be it has to be a useful prediction, doesn't it? Like if you're just predicting that, people are going to keep being self-interested, people are like, yeah, so what? You know, like
But you
the
gotta
theory's
have-
right forever, but it doesn't add a lot. Maybe. I'm not-
True, but if you can, it comes at a precision. Like it
Yeah.
has to I think explain something that in a way that we didn't understand before.
Oh, I see.
So like, here's a phenomenon. We can observe it. We don't know why it works.
Yeah.
It just does that.
Right.
And then you come up with a theory that goes, oh, it's because of X, Y, and Z, and this is the equation that this is the rule. It's definitely essentially finding the rule of the universe, of how things work, right? Like if you can explain any phenomenon, like why gravity works, like how, like what, like, so we didn't understand how like heat works, right? Like we thought there was there's some sort of substrate for heat to transfer, right? Like we so see like heat going ether. From ether is another example, right? Like but what is heat? Heat is just molecules moving really quickly, right? They have the energy, they move very quickly. And I think the metaphor is like, or similarly, like what is a wave? In what is a wave? In water, you see the wave.
Right.
If you look into it, it's just molecules move back and forth.
Right. Oscillation.
The wave is the byproduct of. So it's like when you look down into it, there's no wave.
Yes.
That's kind of like the relationship of quantum mechanics and relativity, right? Like there's a large world phenomenon we're seeing, but then you dig into there's nothing.
That agrees. There's almost, I think we might have very tight consensus here. That's what I was trying to describe earlier with my view of information as a verb, that we're in this cosmic ocean with, in which no one's ever broken the surface, right? It extends in every direction, and it's all just ultimately energy moving at different vibrations. And so every action, for every procession, there's a simultaneous regression. It's always feedback loops in every direction. And so that whole process of the universe mutually informing itself is that process of information I was trying to describe. And again, it might just be semantic, but there was a point
I see a model still. Like everything is a model. So
I wanted to ask you. You said we're discovering rules. Okay, so does that mean it's a game? Rules of what? Rules. What is?
Rules are like.
I mean, you could also say like laws of physics, which I get, but it's like, what does that mean? Why are there rules? Why are there laws?
Like,
what is the thing that has like rules and laws?
Yeah, like if you create a simulation, you would have to have parameters, or not just simulation is simplifying, but any software with some sophistication, complexity, that you would need to introduce parameters and variables to keep track of states, because software is essentially a state machine. You process information, the state changes. This is a definition of a machine, right? Rules basically describes the system. It's essentially the code.
Yeah.
It's the code of the software.
So
so information comes in, state changes.
Yeah.
How does it change?
Right.
Those are the rules.
Within the confines of the rules.
Yeah. The state changes based on the rules.
Right. But it's not purely deterministic at the same time.
It is in our software system.
Well, I mean,
but in the natural inside out, like,
aren't there,
if your computer is changing based on the input, that means your rules are changing.
Okay.
Or it doesn't necessarily mean your rules are changing, but it could mean your rules are changing.
Let me ask you. This is a pivot.
So you could have rules on top of rules where it's like.
Right.
Rules are dynamic, but that's also a rule.
Right. So, man, that's sort of what I'm going to get into, I think, because let's pull up, just since we're on that topic, the Mandelbrot set, Mandlebrot. Second word is set. And maybe one that shows the equation. I don't know if that's available, but or you could maybe just Google it. Yeah, that's just click it. Basically.
Yeah, I have seen this. I guess
it's a very simple equation which you could pull up. It's I forgot what it is. Z equals something squared, and then you plus one something like that, and you feed back the result.
Right.
One recursive tiny tiny. What would you call this? A function? It's an equation, but it's a function too.
Yeah.
And it maps this infinite space that is non-repeating at every scale. So you can zoom into this thing infinitely or zoom out infinitely, and it's always different.
Yeah.
But it has self-similarity, like we're seeing here, the second island of this little, what do you call this structure? I don't know what that is.
It's a fractal, it's a pattern.
It's a fractal cosmic egg of some kind.
Yeah.
And you see that pattern repeat, but not exactly over and over and over and over. It gets way more exotic the further you zoom. And so to tie this into what we were saying earlier about rules, it's like that, there's very few rules governing that.
Yeah. You only need very simple rules to create complexity.
It's generating, so far as we can tell, pure complexity, like pure, infinite complexity.
Yeah.
But there's order in it. So
but imagine the universe had multiple of these rules, and you just get crazy complexity.
Oh my goodness!
That's the
right.
Kind of the world we live in.
This is like one sliver of an aspect of the universe, basically the entire Mandelbrot set.
Yeah, I mean the fact that it is in the universe,
right,
for sure.
But it's so unique because there's one. So far as I know, there's one. There are different.
There are tons
patterns.
of different
the
equations.
Julia sets. There's other fractal patterns.
There's tons of them.
But there's only one like this. I'm pretty sure that's infinite in all directions, and it's very simple and it's just recursive. Anyways, we could maybe dive into it, but the connection I was trying to make was
watch this
rules. What you said it's what governs the system, but in a way, I mean, I guess that's a deterministic pattern. But it's kind of like saying that the last digit in pi is deterministic. It is sort of, but you have to do the work to get it.
Exactly, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how Wolfram explained how the universe works.
So reality is a proof of work time chain.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Bitcoin's awesome then.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have a clip you wanted to show? If not, I've got.
Go for it.
Oh, we're going to show the game of life, maybe?
Okay.
We've talked about it a few times.
That's awesome. Yeah.
This is John Conway's Game of Life. The Game of Life consists of some squares in a space. They are the points in space, sometimes referred to as cells. And a point can be either on or off. Black is on, white is off.
Zeros and
you
ones.
can also call it alive or dead. Now there's a simple rule that tells us whether or not cells stay alive or they die. And that's this. If a cell has if it has no neighbors that are alive, it dies. If it has just one neighbor that's alive, it'll die. So both of these will die. But if it has two neighbors that are alive, it'll stay alive. So look what happens to this cell. It's going to stay alive on the next moment of time. Of course, something else weird happened there, right? These two died, and these two became alive. They were born. Let's look at that again. This cell only has one live neighbor. It's going to die. Same here. It's going to die. So on the next generation, that one will die and that one will die. But there's a rule for birth. And the rule for birth is this. If a cell has exactly 3 live neighbors, it will be born. This cell has exactly 3 live neighbors. And so does that one. So these two will die, and that will be born. And you can see what's going to happen now. By symmetry, it's just going to go back to a horizontal bar, and we have now just an oscillator.
That's a pattern that can.
We're continuing here with Conway's Game of Life, and let's
Stable
look
across
at
time
this
pattern.
pattern.
Yep.
We've got a square, we've got a square, we've got a square. Those are all on. These pointer cells are on or alive. They're energized. So this cell has 2 live neighbors. It's going to stay alive. This cell has 2 live neighbors. It'll stay alive. This cell, the same 2 live neighbors. It'll stay alive. And let's look at this one. That one has 3 live neighbors, so it's going to be born. And that's what happens. It's born. Now, this is a stable pattern, right? Each of these cells has 3 live neighbors. It's alive, and so it's going to stay alive. The surrounding cells don't have enough energy. They don't have enough life around them to be born. So this is just going to be a stable pattern. I'm actually stepping through time, but nothing happens. So that's an interesting pattern. Let's look at this pattern now. Hard to say what this one's going to do, but look what's going to happen. We need to use computers to figure this out. If we had to calculate this by hand, that would be a little rough. It's going to change. Now you can see it looks like it's rotated itself, right, horizontally or vertically. And the same again, you see a reappearance of a pattern. And look at that. That's just back to where it was, except it's back to the same pattern that it was, except it's shifted one to the right and one down. That's a glider. It glides. It moves. Let's look at the glider in a little bit more detail here. There it is. There's a glider that's ready to glide. So here, let's go. Let's step it through time a little bit. There's the next moment of time, the next moment of time, the next moment of time, the next moment of time. You can see it's moved. It's kind of walked. But what are we talking about when we say it? What is the glider? I mean, the cells aren't moving. The points in space don't move. The points in space remain the same. They remain in their same relations with each other. They don't move around. All that's moved is the pattern of qualities, right? The pattern of colors, black and white. And if you think of those as energy, then you've got a moving energy pattern. The glider is a kind of particle, but it's an energetic particle. It's like a vortex moving through space. It's a pattern of energy that moves through space. And because of its regularity, because of its invariance, because of the way its shapes repeat every 4th cycle, it seems to have its own independent existence. Now, some might say that the glider is a thing which emerges from space. Others might just say that the glider is a thing which supervenes on space. Perhaps it's a whole composed of properties or qualities. Or perhaps it's some sort of system or pattern of energy, to use that terminology again. Let's watch it just to see that it's the pattern of energy that's moving. Cells aren't moving. There seems to be a distinctive layer of reality, a second layer of reality.
It's like the way water molecules don't move when the wave passes through it.
Right. The water molecules are just moving back
just
and
oscillation.
forth. Yeah. But the waves propagate.
Yeah.
That's the wave.
That's the glider moving through space.
It's the result of the rules that's set, which is that universe's rules.
Right.
And I guess there's computation because, right?
Yeah.
There's a computation that gets to the next state.
Right.
So it's software running on top of computation that survives. I don't know if you've seen this. There's Turing. Have you seen Game of Life implemented with Game of Life?
No, please.
It's gonna blow your mind if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, the whole. I mean, that's so interesting. The oscillation
This one
moving.
it's mind blowing. So these are just patterns, right? In Game of Life. Just these patterns repeating each generation.
Oh, this is an evolutionary tree, basically. Whoa.
And what this forms So basically, I can talk about it later. I'll let it play.
Wow. Like giant engines of opponent processing, it looks like, or pyramids.
Yeah, but look at what it is.
Wow. Whoa. Oh, you're shitting me. Wow.
It's game of life.
Wow.
Implemented
There it
with
is,
game
right
of
there.
life.
And this is computationally accurate.
Yeah.
Wow. That is as above, so below right there.
Yeah. So this kind of proves that I don't know if you've seen like people building computers in Minecraft.
Oh, I've
Yeah.
scarcely, but yeah, I've seen some.
They build a CPU
Yeah.
based on the rules of the red blocks.
Yeah.
Because you can. I think it's. I'm not sure if Game of Life is Turing complete, but I would think it has to be for them to create this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is crazy. Once you get computation involved, you can make crazy stuff.
Oh, it's incredible. I guess
When I first saw that, I was just like,
that is mind blowing.
Right?
Honestly, everyone should watch that video with once again I'll just read Karl Friston's paraphrase here. The anatomy of every system must contain a model of the system in which it is immersed. And that's what you just
that's
visually
exactly
demonstrated.
what that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
yeah,
Wow. Okay, that's mind blowing. There's one other clip I had. Again, it's John Vervaeke,
okay,
and it's called the. I hope I've got this correct. You could say the elusive I, as in the letter I, like the elusive I. Description or something. Yeah, because I think he has a whole episode by that name, but I'm trying to zero in on the definition he gives. Yeah, maybe it's just early in part one, probably.
We're going to have to ask that question very, very deeply, but by really unpacking this triple dimensionality of agency, and by attributing agency to the self. In fact, we think of our agency as basically like located in and from the self. That really brings out, well, what kind of thing is the self, such that, because I know what it is to say that a living thing is autopoietic. It makes itself out of the matter and energy around. What's the self making itself out of? And I know what a structural functional organization is for an organism, and such that I understand what autonomous is, but we already said, like, the self doesn't even seem to have boundaries. How is it autonomous? What does that mean? And then finally, while the self is adaptive, what environment is it adapting to? And what does that adaptivity look like? So these are questions we have to bring up, even from the folk model itself, even before we try to directly challenge it, although we are already beginning to problematize it by doing this kind of work. Okay.
Right, we're also studying, so that's actually, this is a very, let's just.
This isn't a particular clip that maybe it's in the very beginning of this one, honestly. Maybe they just define it. I'll try to like roughly paraphrase in case we can't find it, but he just emphasizes the problem of I, as in like the letter I, the self-identification I, that to define yourself or categorize yourself or tell yourself the story about yourself that is the self, it always presupposes an outsider that's sort of authoring that story. So there's always a stepping out of the rules of being one cognitive agent to define yourself as a cognitive agent. So they call it the elusive I. Like you can't find where's the ground stuff of I as in self-identification, and how there's no, it's kind of like this, the eye, it's kind of like an eye of the storm in a way. There's like this emptiness in the middle that somehow is above, transcends all the rest of it. And that's I think that's what I don't want to put words in his mouth, but when I invoke contemplative consciousness, That's the other side that I'm referring to. Like it's
the thing that's
it's beyond
contemplative,
calculation. Yes, exactly.
contemplating itself.
Yeah, the ecstatic part that always steps outside of itself. You know, the whole point of rationality is you can always kind of reframe, step outside, step outside.
What
And
is
somehow
the thing
there's
that's doing
exactly,
that?
and it's impossible to define essentially. So
Yeah. It's the software.
it's the software.
It's
It's like an illusion of the software, like a useful
the
illusion.
software creates illusion of self.
Ah,
So you like the game of life, right?
Yeah.
What is running that? If we call it software, there's computing on the rules,
yeah,
and the pattern is kind of like the software, right? This guy created this crazy large pattern, and it became
yeah,
a game of life within the game of life.
yeah,
But that pattern, however it's constructed, we call it, we can label it as software,
no,
and because the computation is running on
right,
it, and imagine instead of game of life, like game of life within the game of life, it's self within game of life. So this more concretely, instead of like the outside is game of life, it's a whole, it's like Minecraft.
yeah,
It's more than just grids, 3D. You got blocks
yeah,
moving around, and then you got characters in the form like Minecraft, like a person. You can imagine, right? But zoom in underneath, it's game of life doing its rotation thing. But zoom out, you got this 3D thing going on, right? And then one of the characters has has internal process somehow, right? Like it's thinking, oh, there's a self. There's a, like you can see a whole universe constructed that way, right? Like or at least for me, I can kind of imagine, right? Underneath, it's just this game of life, and outside is like this game, this virtual world with all these different simulations going on, and then and in it you can have self.
Wow.
And that could be us, right?
Yeah.
That could be us.
So we're a self-projecting avatar from the cosmos or something, like a dream character in a dream, perhaps.
There's a rule or a pattern or software that's being executed. We don't know what is executing it.
That's what I was gonna say, because this also presupposes intelligent design. There's a guy that designed that and put it on the internet.
Yep.
So sort of, is that an inference for us to take into consideration?
I would think so. I would think I mean, there's two ways to go about it. Like this thing exists in the sense that it's possible. Because it's possible, it exists in like the mathematical universe, right? And this guy realized it and found it or put it out there. Like now we can see it.
Yeah.
But it was always there, right? Like
Sure.
this pattern
discovered.
always existed.
For sure.
And
Based on those rules, but what I mean, it's based on the rules of Euclidean geometry, basically.
no, the rules are the game of life rules. He explained, right?
Okay, so
that rule.
those rules then, but the arbitrariness of those rules now, because obviously if you change the rules, you get totally different results.
That wouldn't work.
So back to the rules question for ontological reality. Did we just get a certain mix of rules from the game of life? So this is like a universal Darwinism thing, that our Big Bang was just one iteration of other laws of physics and other cosmos. Is that
It's possible. I mean, like we don't know what is the thing that's executing it, and we don't know how many other things is being executed.
does this infer the existence of God, or at least a word that for the thing that's beyond what we can't know, like the thing executing it? I mean,
Yeah. So there's two possibilities. There's one possibility of, I think, things exist because it's the surviving pattern, kind of like the pattern ultimately survived, and that's why it exists. All other patterns, all possible patterns, there are ones that survives and there are ones that doesn't, and the ones that it's like there's infinite. It's like the infinite universe theory, right? Like we are in this universe. It's fine-tuned to the way, like we have all these magic numbers, right? Like the gravity has a constant, there's the Planck constant, there's all these crazy constants. Even though they're a little bit off, physics would completely be different. There would be no sun, there would be no earth, nothing would behave the same way. But because of how fine-tuned they are, it's possible for our universe to exist. So does that mean it's, design? Maybe. But the other possibility is there's just infinite of these things, and we just happen to be the one that has these, and we can't know.
so we just haven't discovered alternative configurations. We couldn't even
there's
discover.
no way for us to get out of our universe,
Right.
So,
Unless we find wormholes or some other, science fiction thing.
Yeah. It would be like if we're in the simulation, if we're in that game of life.
Yeah. That we jumped out of the computer.
You would be able to exploit a bug in the rule. Usually software has bugs. So Mario is a good example.
Yeah.
Mario's full of bugs, right? Normally you're just jumping around, going in pipes, breaking blocks, and mushrooms come out, whatever, right? But then there's weird blocks that you punch and it doesn't break, and you end up going through to another part of the game.
Yeah.
That's like finding a bug, right?
Yeah.
Like if we discover something like that, that sort of breaks the rule of the game, right?
Yeah.
The game has its physics, right? Like you jump and it comes down, and it's got like you go in the pipe, it comes out the other end, right? It's got all these rules, but you break the rules. You just went through a wall,
Right.
and those exploits might exist in our simulation too.
Wow. When you use the term simulation, I mean, you're presupposing
Or software. Yeah.
You're presupposing a deeper ontological reality that there are people somewhere at bottom executing this software, or people, I don't know, beings.
I am. I don't know if it's true, but yeah, like I think that's when most people think about simulation theory. That's what they're thinking of. Like the universe is a computer program being executed in some computer. I don't know if you watched Rick and Morty.
Yeah, not much, but yes,
There's an episode of like Rick creating like a little universe in the box. I forgot it's in the computer or in the box, but ultimately it's in the box. And then those people, they have sentient, and so basically he's God to them. But then those people also create a universe. It keeps going down. It's just like then the people that they create,
as above, so below.
Yeah, they keep on creating universe, and he's going like 7 levels down into the universe. And it's just like inevitably, whenever there's a simulation, you would ask, who's running the simulation?
Right.
Like it's like, who created God?
Well, could it be like the Mandelbrot set where it is just infinite in every direction, and there's it doesn't ground out in a creator, but then we call it the Mandelbrot set. There's a creator, so it's like
something created that, someone. Well, he discovered it.
He discovered it.
It's always been there.
It's always discovered. Man, such mind blowing stuff. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar. letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is coinbits, BITS.app/breedlove. Before starting the What is Money show, I spent most of my career as a CFO, overseeing internal technology implementations and business acquisitions. Over the next 10 years, it is projected that over 12 million businesses in the US will be sold. If you are an operator running a business generating between $5 and $200 million of revenue, and you're considering selling your business within the next decade, then there is a significant opportunity for you to deploy technology to streamline business processes, reduce operating costs, and enhance the multiple your business ultimately sells for. To this end, I am partnering with the team at Emerge Dynamics, a firm with decades of experience in maximizing the value of privately held small and middle market businesses. Go to emergedynamics.com/breedlove to learn how you can build an attractive, high multiple company that maximizes your return when you fully exit. Again, that's emergedynamics.com/breedlove. We're jumping ahead again, but I think something you said triggered this for me. It's all software.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah, I'll put air quotes on it.
You're, if I may, invoking the dominant modern metaphoric understanding of technological reality, right? It's the most sophisticated technology we have more or less today is software based.
Yes.
And it's given us new metaphors for understanding ourselves, right? We often metaphorize the brain as a computer, for instance. We're talking about consciousness itself as calculational. You know, that's a form of computer computation. We've done that in the past too, right? Like in the industrial age, we metaphorize the body as a machine, you know, the heart as a pump, things like this. We now know the heart's more like a vortex. It behaves more like a storm than a pump.
I hear it's one
Yes, it can
tissue.
be
You can
spiral.
expand. Yeah, it's a spiral.
It's fractal, basically.
Yeah,
of course.
you can get it into like one piece of muscle.
Yes.
And it curls into the heart.
Yes, and just like, I mean, we are all fractal, right? The vasculature of our bodies mirrors, you know, river systems, and you know, it's fractal. When we metaphorized ourselves as industrial age machines in the past, that was useful in some ways, right? It gives us a better understanding, maybe, of the human body in certain ways. It also can mislead you, right? If you really think the body's just a machine, you know, you might not pay attention to the chemistry, for instance, something like that. So these metaphors can be useful, just like Vervaeke was saying earlier. We need to make these frames to stand upon, but then occasionally they can become self-limiting, as we saw with the 9-dot problem. So today, metaphorizing everything as software, how do you look at that problem in given your view of all of it as software? Like, could we have a 22nd century technological revolution that better defined us?
It's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. This is just given our understanding
Today.
of physics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's similar to the Newton thing, right? Like everything worked fine. They had a model of the way that their universe worked until they ran into problems where it didn't work.
Right.
Right? They were looking at the planets and it's off. It's off by like a bunch of like days, right?
Yeah.
Or hours or something, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a big off, and it's like, did we miscalculate?
The predictive power.
They do it like a million times, and it's like something's wrong here, right? And it doesn't match up. So then you come up with a new model, right? And then that does explain it. But later on, you'll run into another issue maybe. And that's what happened with the relativity.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine the same thing happening with software being
Right.
yeah. So
yeah.
our it's purely based on our current understanding of what we observe. So like I earlier said, if AI, completely has a different experience of the universe because they're able to see photons moving and
Right.
their understanding of it might completely be different. But for me, it's hard to imagine what that is because you don't know what you don't know. So in my limited sense, every when you have a hammer, everything is a nail, right? So that's it's hard for me to not see things as a software because that's like my fundamental is computation and information.
Yeah.
The computation of or information processing,
this is the highest resolution map.
Yeah, I don't have anything else.
Yeah. No, that's well said. Yeah, it's well said, and I wonder what it would be. It's so a rough example. Maybe we see 5% of the visible light spectrum, right? What if AI somehow could? Well, they already can. If AI's sense organs become, radio telescopes,
we see all of the visible.
I'm sorry, the light spectrum. But 5% is visible of the total light spectrum.
Yeah, the electromagnetic
spectrum.
Yeah.
So if AI could see whatever percentage more,
we make
than that,
machines that do that. Our telescopes can see.
That's what I'm saying.
range.
If those became the sense organs of one globally unified AI, presumably that thing would have a much higher consciousness than all humans, right? Because of its, as you were saying, all that's available to you are your senses, right? That's why you're defining it in terms of software.
Yes.
It would have much more, its senses would have much more accessibility to the depths of perceivable reality.
Yes.
Would it then, I don't know, have just different metaphors, different levels of understanding, something like that?
The thing is, we sort of, because we can build these other sensors. So we the telescope we build has a huge range of electromagnetic radiation, right? They can detect all these. That sort of enables us to also kind of interpret those things too. And I think feeding those sensories directly to our brain versus and then our brain doing integration or information processing on those and coming up with model versus us currently the way we interpret them is we map them onto colors which we can interpret.
Right.
I don't know how much difference there is. I don't know if it's gonna completely be different. What I'm talking about is more we don't even know the signals. We know there's electromagnetic radiation, so we built sensors on those.
Yeah.
But who knows what other signals are out there?
Dark energy, dark matter, etc.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Speaking of those, the Wolfram thing has a explanation on those
really?
too. Yeah, his Wolfram physics. I should pull up his video.
Yeah.
It's another one of those long podcasts. It's kind of like this. It's an interview.
We're good on time. It's so funny. We said we were going to talk about gluten.
We never got to
gluten. So we got gluten.
Yes, gluten's in design space.
Gluten, we're coming for you.
Yeah. Feel free to
zooming in.
Feel free to jump to it whenever.
No, I'm loving this. I think humility is actually a really good strategy for dealing with a complex reality. For sure. You're wrong about almost everything all the time.
Yeah.
Basically.
Just be less wrong.
Yeah.
That's what Elon's model is.
Yeah.
You're just always wrong, but you're trying to be less.
Be less wrong.
Isn't that from Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution?
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
I see.
That one changed my life.
Which is also invoked with the map is not the territory. It's like we're always mapping. You can never fully map the territory.
Right. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Some maps are more useful than others depending on your context, circumstances, purpose.
Yeah, this is Wolfram talking about him finally understanding quantum. He's probably the only person that's kind of still active or alive that's worked with Richard Feynman. He was the youngest PhD at Caltech at I think age 20, and then he became a professor after that in particle physics. Feynman, I think, read his PhD paper, and I think the next year he won the first MacArthur Fields Prize, basically the Genius Grant, and he was still the youngest person to receive it at age 21.
Wow.
Yeah, at the time, like Feynman's late, but he's worked with Feynman on yeah. And then later on, he got into computers. He had a dispute with Caltech, and he doesn't have anything nice to say about Caltech now. But I think, and then he created a software called Mathematica. It's the premier software for doing math.
So not Wolfram Alpha.
He created Wolfram
Created
Alpha.
that too. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
it's all him. He's probably a billionaire. He's done really well, and he's been very active. Like his latest thing is Wolfram Physics and this Rulliad thing.
Okay. And what is that? What is that?
That
Rule,
is
that's a very
the
key word.
Rulliad is the all possibility of rules. We talk about rules in the universe, right?
So it's the total design space for rules.
Exactly. So total design of a space of all possible universe too, because he thinks universe it has to be this computational universality. But anyways, him trying to explain essentially quantum mechanics in his latest understanding.
Okay.
Dick Feynman always used to say he'd worked on quantum mechanics his whole life, and he always used to say nobody understands quantum mechanics. And I talked to him about that at great length. Okay, it's a shame he isn't still alive, because I think I now finally am beginning to understand quantum mechanics.
One thing that's always kind of flabbergasted me is you start with something in classical mechanics, a Poisson bracket, and you have commutation relations, and exact same language and mathematics transmutes exactly over, into quantum mechanics, except these things are non-vanishing. And in fact, they also involve the square root of -1. And it's completely, almost as mind-blowing a fact as there is. Feynman used to say, as you knew Feynman personally, but that the most remarkable relation is Euler's relation between E and pi and I and so forth. But this to me is almost even more remarkable, that you get a physical. I mean, that's just in the laws of mathematics. I'm not minimizing it, but now you've got this thing in classical mechanics that ports 1-to-1, except for the square root. What do you make of this? I mean, is this something that is just a fact?
No, not yet.
Okay.
He's just
so how does that
describing
work?
this
I
phenomenon.
mean, it's always sort of fun
classic,
because Dick Feynman always
mechanics
used to
that
say
maps.
he'd worked on quantum mechanics his whole life, and he always used to say nobody understands quantum mechanics. And I talked to him about that at great length. Okay, it's a shame he isn't still alive, because I think I now finally am beginning to understand quantum mechanics. And so one question is, like, where does the I come from in quantum mechanics? I think it's a confusion, actually. I think that one of the things that was sort of a wrong turn that was taken.
This is the square root of -1.
Yes.
Actually, was what was done not by Einstein but by Minkowski in 1919, when he said, "Oh, space and time are really the same kind of thing. Let's package them together into this thing we call space-time." And he did that. Minkowski was a number theorist, a mathematician, and he said, "It's very elegant. We can make these quadratic forms that are x squared for space and t squared for time, and it's x squared minus t squared. It's all very beautiful. We can package together space and time as being the single space-time thing." I think that was a mistake. I think space is a thing that's very different from time. Space is this extension of this hypergraph. Time is the inexorable progress of computation. It is an emergent fact that space and time sort of work together in the ways that give relativity. That's an emergent fact. That's not something that's built into the underlying model. In quantum mechanics, I think a similar wrong turn was taken. So in quantum mechanics, one of the things that one does when one formulates quantum mechanics in terms of wave functions in the Schrodinger equation, or a whole variety of other versions of that formalism, what one's doing is one's saying there are these quantum amplitudes. There are these things that we will be able to represent kind of the quantum world in terms of. And quantum amplitudes are complex numbers. They have a magnitude. The overall, complex numbers can be represented in you can sort of plot them in two dimensions, and they have a distance from the origin and an angle from the origin.
Direction and
the magnitude and the phase. In quantum mechanics, one packages together the magnitude and the phase. In our models, they come from completely different places. The magnitude comes from the counting of the number of paths in this multi-way system. The phase is basically the position in branchial space. There's a bunch of mathematics we have not yet worked out, and that's quite difficult, I would say. But what seems to be the case is that what's happening is, in quantum mechanics, okay, so I should say another thing. In space-time, one of the key things that happens is that the presence of energy momentum, or mass, deflects shortest paths. So, as you know very well, there are geodesic paths, shortest paths in space-time. And, when you just are dealing with everything on a plane, for example, the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. If you distort that plane, the shortest path between 2 points won't be a straight line anymore. And the kind of original idea of general relativity was the structure of space-time is being distorted by the presence of mass, and that distortion is causing shortest paths to no longer be straight lines. Shortest paths are deflected, and that's the deflection associated with the force of gravity. And that's kind of the basic idea of general relativity. And so what happens in our models is, well, you can have shortest paths, same kind of deal. In this graph, you can just say, what's the shortest path on the graph going through edges of the graph? How do you get from this place to that place going through the smallest number of edges on the graph? So now you can say, well, the next question is, what's energy momentum? This is something that really surprised me, actually. I thought it was going to be very difficult to understand what energy momentum is. Turns out it's not. Turns out energy momentum is essentially just the density of activity in the network. So we've got all this network is being rewritten in all these different ways. We can represent that slightly more formally by a causal graph that says there are these little rewrite events. And every rewrite event is producing output that will be the input to subsequent rewrite events. And we can make this graph that represents the sort of causal connections between these things. And energy is simply, if we look at, well, we have to define in relativity, as you well know, we're talking about space-like hypersurfaces. These things, so events can be related in a time-like way, in the sense that one event is followed by another event in a sequence in time. But there are also events that can be space-like separated, where those events can happen simultaneously in time. If you're time-like separated, you better not be space-like separated, because one event follows from another event, and they couldn't be simultaneous. But there are events that are sort of orthogonal to the time-like directions, are space-like directions. There are many different choices of space-like directions. That's what gives the reference frames in relativity and so on. But in any case, if you look at these space-like hypersurfaces, energy in our models is simply the flux of these causal edges through space-like hypersurfaces. Momentum is flux through time-like hypersurfaces. Okay, so then you can derive the existence of gravity. And you can derive the fact that when there is this density of activity in the network, it deflects shortest paths in the network. That's a pretty neat thing, that you can give an intuitive definition, intuitive explanation of why gravity happens.
Exactly.
Right. So actually, to give another one of these intuitive things,
just another example
time dilation, the phenomenon of special
different models
that
of explaining
things that are going fast,
his model
things that are moving a lot,
has an explanation for every phenomenon.
Yeah.
So
well, in our models, you can kind of see why that happens. Because what is time? Time is this inexorable process
he explain something
of executing computations.
Or make a prediction.
Motion does
that have predictive power?
Yeah.
Can you rewind like maybe 30 seconds? It's hard to keep up with. That's all right.
That's a pretty neat thing that you can give an intuitive definition.
It is like
intuitive
gravitational
explanation of why
lensing,
gravity
yeah.
but
happens.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, actually, to give another one of these intuitive things, so time dilation is a phenomenon of special relativity. That things that are going fast, things that are moving a lot, time seems to go slower for them. Well, in our models, you can kind of see why that happens. Because what is time? Time is this inexorable process of executing computations. Motion is you get to recreate yourself at a different place in space. That phenomenon of motion, the fact that you're recreating yourself at a different place in space, that takes computational effort. So they have this trade-off. What are you going to spend your computational effort on? You're going to spend your computational effort on moving in space, or are you going to use it on progressing in time? And so when you're moving in space, you're using up your computation on motion, so you don't have as much left over to progress in time. So that means you effectively, time goes slower for you.
Can you pause it?
And that's what time dilation
This is I've often thought of it as dimensionality, right? If you put space on one axis and time on another, you can move purely through time, but that would mean you're sitting still, right? Or you could move purely through space, but you wouldn't move through time at all because you'd be at the speed of light. And so what he's saying something similar. Obviously, we move kind of diagonal depending on how fast we're moving, and time speeds up or slows down for us. But it sounds like he's describing.
Yeah,
I forgot how
that's
to put
the model of time space, or I mean,
it's
the
almost like,
complex number, right? The complex number is the you have a thing for axis for space, and then you have a axis for time, and you're bundling them together into this time space thing.
So what he was saying is basically time is the progress of computation, right?
Yeah.
And then, but moving through space is recreating yourself at a different location, which absorbs computational power and therefore slows the progress of time. It just seems like you're either moving through.
I mean, your mental
you're moving
model
through
maps.
space or time, and the more you move through space, the less affected you are by time. Yeah, it's a different model, but it's like a similar concept.
The result's the same.
Yeah,
The results.
Anyways, I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Totally. It's I mean, end of the day, it's just a cool model to have all these different models that explains all the observations that we're making.
Yeah,
and they could be so wildly different.
right.
That already shows that there's so much more complexity.
Right.
Because you can come up with so many different explanations of why things are.
Yeah.
And then only one of them could be right.
I know there's only one. That's what's so interesting about mathematics. Like natural language, maybe not. I don't know if there's an ultimate territory to map, but with mathematics, it does seem like we're mapping something very fundamental.
This is you should watch this whole thing.
No, we'll watch the rest of it.
No, I mean, like this is.
It's only got 3 minutes left, right?
Yeah. But this is a clip of hour thing. I mean, we don't need to watch the whole hour thing. I think.
Let's watch the rest of the clip though.
Yeah. Okay.
To me, it's really amazing that you can give what is essentially a mechanistic explanation of what seemed to be a purely kind of the math happens to work out that way kind of phenomenon. But okay, so that's how this works in physical space. In branchial space, there's a similar phenomenon. You have these geodesics, these shortest paths, things travel on shortest paths, but now energy momentum also deflects shortest paths in branchial space. And then what's the consequence of that? Well, there's something is deflecting shortest paths, and it's moving where you are in branchial space. The fundamental law of quantum mechanics, one way to state it, is the Feynman path integral. The Feynman path integral says you have this thing that is what's called the action, kind of this relativistically invariant version of energy, and that the presence of action, effectively energy momentum, is the thing that changes the phase of your description of the quantum system. So in other words, the presence of energy momentum is making this change. So in our models, the presence of energy momentum is deflecting geodesics. It's moving things, but it's moving things not in physical space, but in branchial space. So now the question is, what is motion in branchial space? Well, motion in branchial space appears to be change of quantum phase. And so what's happening is the phenomenon that is general relativity, that is deflection due to gravity in physical space, that same phenomenon, the deflection in branchial space, is a change of quantum phase. And that change of quantum phase is what the path integral says should happen in quantum mechanics. So in other words, what one's saying is quantum mechanics is the same phenomenon as gravity and general relativity. What is general relativity in physical space is quantum mechanics in branchial space. They're the same thing.
Holy shit. They're mirror images in a way, but not exact.
Yeah, some of this stuff goes over my understanding, but yeah, it's the full interview, he goes through like a ton of other examples. Some of them will make more sense than others. It's great. I love this video.
That was absolutely thrilling. Wow, nerd catnip right there. Okay, I think we've probably covered almost everything. The only thing we didn't talk about
is gluten.
Gluten's next. The last thread on this topic, I don't know if it's worth inserting or not, the free energy principle.
Let's not go into that.
Skip it. Straight to gluten.
Let's there's tons of YouTube videos on free
That's
energy
Mr.
principle.
Karl Friston as well.
I have a pretty good one. I can send you all these later too.
Yeah, definitely do. And we'll put them in the show notes. We will splice them into the video as well.
Kurt Friston's free energy principle is a cool concept which I do not yet understand. That means I'm going to make a Talking Squid video essay about it.
Not Kurt. He got the name wrong.
That's funny.
Yeah, shows. This is a great intro, though.
The phrase free energy made me immediately skeptical. It sounds like making infinite energy for free using a perpetually spinning wheel or whatever. Friston's free energy principle isn't like that at all. It's kind of the opposite. A neuroscientist, Friston claims sentient beings and some cool robots he simulated work by minimizing a variable called free energy in a mathematical formula from Bayesian statistics. Here's a picture of a brain. Don't worry about the scary Greek letters representing numbers. Let's just put our foot down and say whatever the brain's whole deal is, it's got some internal states. Something's going on in there. Something's going on outside the brain too. We can put our other foot down about that, and we call it hidden states or external states. Brains don't get to know everything going on out there, but they do get sensations. And brains don't get to touch everything going on out there, but they can take actions. Internal states and external states don't directly interact, but they do interact. Minimizing free energy is minimizing surprise. Sometimes the sensations the universe provides are just bewildering. A bewildered brain doesn't even know what its next action will be because it's never been bewildered like this before. To minimize surprise, the brain takes actions which make the universe less bewildering all the time. The brain finds loops, actions which lead to sensations it knows how to react to. That sounds familiar, right? You and I have daily routines. We know how to eat breakfast. We know how to commute to work. We know how to eat lunch. We know how to commute back home. We know how to eat dinner. We know how to watch TV. We know how to fall asleep and do it all again when we wake up. If any aspect of this routine surprises us one day, we might take actions to get the routine back on track. We have routines which last weeks, months, or years, like holidays. We also have routines which last minutes or even moments, like breathing or having a heartbeat. If any of those routines surprise us, we'll do whatever it takes to get back to normal. Minimizing surprise, minimizing free energy, means maximizing the likelihood that our conceptualization of the world is correct. Our internal states need to share information with the sensations.
Mapping the territory.
Information out there in the universe has to be represented in here. Your brain
want to predict.
created your universe
as above, so below,
and recreates it at every moment, just so you, yes, you, can take action.
Pause real quick. just like you've seen the photos of the galactic superclusters. They look just like neural architecture, basically. Like, is it all the way to that point? Are we actually, our brains mirroring the deepest structures of the cosmos?
We're pattern matching machines. You give us a bunch of noise,
Yeah.
just random noise.
Yeah.
We can get past. That's why when we see clouds,
Right.
we can see shapes and stars form,
But
constellations.
Man, dude, if we're mapping that in our neuronal architecture, that's mind blowing. Because we can barely see that with the most powerful telescopes in the world today. Even then, we have to assemble it in a bunch of photos to see those giant clusters.
It's just software running.
Just signals.
It's got an algorithm. Any input you give it, it's gonna ultimately spit out an output. And that's what our pattern recognition is.
It's the music of the spheres, basically, from the ancient Greeks.
Yeah.
It's the movements of the heavens propagate down into us, and
yeah, it is literally like a function. It's like a meat grinder. You put meat in, something comes out. It doesn't matter what you put in.
the universe is a meat grinder.
yeah. It's like it's just doing its thing, and when we
That's
put
our episode
meat
title right there.
I don't know.
That's awesome. Yeah, let's finish this. Sorry, I
There's
didn't
a
mean to
lot of
interrupt.
discussion about the free energy principle, and not everyone is sold on the idea. But Friston has developed a generator which uses the math version of what I've just described to generate simple actions. He says his generator, which is sort of a simulated robot, captures the bare essentials of a maze forging task under novelty or uncertainty. In the absence of any knowledge about the maze that has been accrued through previous learning or experience, the subject had to forage for local information to build an internal model of the maze structure using short sequences of saccadic eye movements. In conclusion, we have described an active inference scheme for epistemic foraging and goal-directed navigation using a minimal setup. The key contribution or insight afforded by these simulations is to show that purposeful, goal-directed behavior can be prescribed through simple prior beliefs about the outcomes that will be encountered under allowable policies.
Wow.
This is what I'm saying. It's only doing one thing, minimal surprise, and the result is it forms a map of the maze and navigates through it.
Yes.
All just from like doing one thing.
100%.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me.
That's like one rule. That's the rule of the universe for that software. It's like,
what is that?
just
How do we
minimum.
define that particular rule? It's just, what do you call that rule? Map the maze?
No. The rule is just minimizing surprise.
Just minimizing.
And then you give it,
Yeah.
it's like that's the meat grinder.
Yeah.
Like you open up the meat grinder, there's a bunch of blades and whatever. How you set up the blades, that's how you're setting, the how you set up the blade is the rule.
Right.
And then when you put the meat in, it comes out. Like you can imagine you got blades and meat comes out, instead of like round, you get squares or different shapes or whatever, right?
Yeah.
This is just minimizing surprise. And the meat you put in is this maze.
Yes.
And out comes like this model that can go through this maze.
Right.
And all you did was set up this one rule.
So the end of his definition there that he was reading from Karl Friston's work, I take it, right?
Not a definition. I think the result of this experiment.
Got it. How it connects, it's not necessarily a rabbit hole I want to go into, but Mises describes human action as purposeful human behavior, right? Like the use of means to pursue ends. So he goes straight into that. Does this mean then that, would we say that all forms of life are engaging in action? That they're all goal-oriented, agential organisms?
And this is at like the cellular level.
Right. So even,
Cells
are
just
molecules doing this?
So there's the concept he didn't talk about, but it's called the Markov blanket. Let's see. I think in the beginning when he's showing you see here. Markov blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Minimize the difference between the model and the map and the territory, basically.
The blanket is the thing that separates what it is to the outside. So you got a thing.
Our skin.
Yes. Yeah. For us, it's the skin. For cell, maybe it's the cellular skin.
Right.
And there's got to be a thing that, whatever the thing is, you got to have an inside and outside. Like, what is containing this thing that you call this thing?
Yes.
And then there's everything else that's not the thing.
Yes.
Right. And that's the boundary is the Markov blanket.
Right.
The problem with this is the problem with going smaller than a cell is the stuff inside might not. You can theorize. This is where it's like, I don't know if free energy principle applies to things smaller than the cell. It's because the thing inside it no longer has like the complex, like
the clearly delineated Markov blankets.
Right, like cell works well, and then above cell, multicellular, all these things that self-organize, all that makes sense. But when it's the atom self-organizing the molecules, that's where it's I'm not sure. Sure. Right. But
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we're around 4 minutes, maybe.
More
right there.
math.
Yeah.
Like, why did I think this video was good?
It's
far,
great.
It's not.
Oh, I'm really enjoying it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just play it through. I think it might get better later on. I don't remember.
Minimizing free energy works. Maybe it's not how the human brain literally operates, but it can make working robot brains, and that's good enough for me. It works. How does it work? If X and Y are events, we can write the probability of X happening as Px, and the probability of Y happening as Py. This is Bayes' theorem. The probability of X happening, assuming Y is happening, is equal to the probability of X times the probability of Y assuming X divided by the probability of Y. For example, rolling a die, a regular old die. The probability that the die rolls a 6 is 1 out of 6. The probability that the die rolls an even number is 1 in 2. If the die rolls a 6, it's certainly rolled an even number. So the probability that the die rolls a 6, given that the die shows an even number, is 1 in 6 times 1 divided by 1 in 2, 1 in 3. If you roll a die and it's even, there's a 1/3 chance that it's a 6. That's pretty simple. Reality? Not simple. How does our brain use sensations to figure out the most likely nature of reality around us? We're trying to maximize this, which Bayes says is the same as maximizing this. If we assume our sensations are continuous instead of discrete, we can rewrite this like this. This integral is just bad integral, intractable, too hard. But we can approximate it using a generator like the one Friston made, which predicts the joint probability of getting whatever sensations based on whatever corresponding environment. I'm not completely sure I understand any of what I just said, but in my experience, I've got to learn something like this 5 or 6 times before I actually understand it. I hope I can learn about it a couple more times at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. I've been thinking more about the project I'm proposing to OIST. It seems like that's all I do here at Thinkster. Last time I said I wanted to simulate a swarm of turtles, but learning more about free energy has convinced me to turn the turtles into bees. I made an animation to describe what I've got in mind. This is a grid. Yellow tiles are bees, pink tiles are flowers, and black tiles are the hive. Bees are always choosing actions, do nothing or move around. If they move to a flower, they collect some nectar. If they move to the hive, they deposit that nectar. Bees eventually die, but new bees are born whenever enough nectar is collected. These bees are just moving randomly, but I'd like to attach each bee to a neural network, sort of like this one. Actions are chosen based on the bee's memory of the world around it and its own previous actions. If I ran a real simulation like this, I think the bees would just die. I'm not telling them to collect nectar and make more bees, so they'll probably wander aimlessly. But if I ran 1,000 of these simulations, I bet a few of them would accidentally collect some nectar and start a new generation. This could begin a loop of survival, where the bees keep starting new generations because that's their routine. If older bees start doing waggle dances to teach new bees what to do, that'd be philosophically intriguing. I like to think this is how DNA works in natural selection. No one gave DNA a goal to keep making copies of itself, but DNA which doesn't make copies of itself doesn't tend to stick around. I'm gonna keep playing with these bees. Bye-bye.
It's kind of like another game of life.
Right.
And then you end up with bees
Yes.
creating. Yeah, I think his follow-up is better. That's probably why but I don't know if we want to watch this next one.
My Talking Squid video essay was about Friston's free energy principle, neuroscience's latest model of the sentient being. I described a project involving bees. I still like the idea, but it's another classic example of me getting way too complicated, way too quick. The project I actually proposed to OIST is much more simple. Karl Friston demonstrated his free energy principle by training a program to navigate a maze. I want to train 2 programs to navigate a maze, one predator and one prey. The predator wants to minimize its distance to the prey. The prey wants to maximize its distance from the predator. At OIST, I'd like to make this work continuously, but for now, let's leave it discrete, like a board game. In each time step, the predator and prey both move one space up, left, down, or right. The 2 agents compete, learning how to best interpret their perceptions of reality by minimizing free energy in a generative adversarial network. Last time I talked about free energy, I skipped most of the deeper math. Now I've read and reread enough tutorials to go over one step by step, explaining how it applies to my project here. Also, thank you, Professor Juntani, for recommending this tutorial from Medium.com. Reality can be called a collection of hidden variables, which I'll label S, meaning state. Our reality is big and complicated, but the predator and prey have a pretty simple reality we can edit in a photo editor. Every white tile is open. Every black tile is an obstacle. Let's call this area an X by Y matrix of ones and zeros. Let's add 2 layers which are just zeros, except one 1 at the predator's position and another 1 at the prey's position. This reality is a 3 by X by Y matrix of ones and zeros. But all this is hidden. No one gets to see every part of reality at once, except us deities who made this reality in a photo editor. Predator and prey only observe reality within a few spaces of their position. Let's say Z spaces. So predator and prey get 3 by Z matrices of ones and zeros, which I'll label O, meaning observation. They both use these small observations to understand their larger reality, generating an inferred state. Given some observation, what's the probability reality is one state or another? If reality was one state or the other, what's the probability to get this observation? This is called active inference. Our conceptualization of reality should maximize the likelihood of the observations we're getting. Maximizing the probability of our observations is the same as minimizing the negative log of the probability of our observations, also called our surprise. Whew. Okay, the tutorial notes that the probability of an event is equal to the sum of the probabilities of that event occurring alongside every alternative for another event. For instance, the probability of rolling a 6 on a die is 1 out of 6. And if we rolled another die next to it, we can think of that 1/6 probability as divided into sections based on the other die. So we can include all possibilities for reality inside this expression we're calling surprise. We also multiply by Q of S divided by Q of S. Whatever Q of S is, Q of S divided by Q of S is 1, and multiplying by 1 is a perfectly fine thing to do. Now, we're trying to minimize this surprise, and that's hard. It would be a little easier to minimize this thing, because this Q of S is outside the logarithm. This expression is called free energy. Thankfully, it just so happens that free energy is the upper bound of surprise. So minimizing free energy does minimize surprise, approximately. The tutorial loses this minus sign by inverting this fraction in the logarithm. Then the tutorial shows another way to represent free energy with a notation I had never heard of before. Callback Leibler divergence, also called relative entropy. The KL of two probability distributions is a measure of difference which best measures 0 when the probability distributions are exactly the same. If we can manage that here, then the free energy happens to be equal to the surprise. And we can probably get pretty close, because Q of S is an arbitrary nonsense function we made up. We just have to nudge it closer to P of S given O. To turn math into a metaphor, we're making our private notion of the universe into something similar to what our observations are suggesting. Professor Jun Tani might suggest our private notion of the universe should involve long short-term memory networks. Okay, I'm going to quote directly from the tutorial just to make sure I'm reading it right. By minimizing free energy, the arbitrary distribution Q of S gets closer to the posterior P of S given O. And if they match, KL term becomes 0, and free energy is exactly equal to surprise. So the more we minimize free energy by wiggling Q of S, the more it becomes closer to surprise, since it's an upper bound. And by minimizing free energy by wiggling parameters of P of S and S, we can minimize surprise even further. So that's what it means to actively infer for one discrete moment. But because reality changes in every moment, we can't stick to one discrete moment. Our inner model might not work so well with whatever we observe next, so we have to improve our model in every time step. And reality can change based on what we chose to do lately. To minimize free energy, we've got to choose our own actions responsibly. At every time step, we approximate these terms for every possible policy. We might like to consider our policies and actions several steps into the future, but we can't predict the future, so we've got to approximate it. I'm skipping a few complicated steps here, but the tutorial's final way to write free energy is like this: the sum of cost and ambiguity. To quote the tutorial again, because I think this is the sort of thing I might be learning to understand for months or years, the left term, called cost or risk, favors policies that will result in observations we like. And the right term, ambiguity, quantifies how uncertain is the mapping between state and observations. Let's cover the tutorial's incredibly simple example, and then try to stretch that example out to my predator/prey project proposal. Suppose the universe has only two possible states. Your stomach has food, or your stomach does not have food. There are only two possible observations: 2, feeling fed or feeling hungry. There are also only two possible actions: eating or not eating. Where does a mind fit into this? Squint, or you'll miss it. Says the tutorial, we like to be fed and not hungry, so we assign a higher probability to observation 1, fed. In other words, we express preferences over observations as probability P of O. Doesn't that sound a little backward? I thought we'd be estimating probability, but the concept of assigning probability to our observations makes it sound the other way around.
So we believe to
want to
achieve.
feel fed, so we're putting a higher probability on the chance of us feeling fed.
Wow.
When we make a decision, we consider our high likelihood to feel fed, and that might inspire us to feed ourselves, because that would explain the feeling fed. To put it the tutorial's way, we start by estimating the hidden states under each policy, and end up acting such as we observe what we expect. No wonder motivational speakers are all about optimism and vision. The numbers say you go where you aim. Not everyone who thinks they become president becomes president, but no one who thinks they won't become president becomes president. They don't bother taking any of the steps. So if we want our computer to do something for us, we should tell it, this is going to be accomplished. I'm 100% sure. Do it. So let's stretch this out to the predator and prey. The reality here is bigger than two states, food or no food. There's a whole 3 by X by Y matrix of zeros and ones. The observations are bigger than Boolean 2. The predator and prey both have a 3 by Z matrix of zeros and ones, and they can tell how far apart they are from the other agent. Pred and prey both have 4 possible actions, up, left, down, or right. I want the predator to chase the prey, so I tell it closeness has high probability. When the predator makes a decision, it picks the action which leads to what I told it to expect. At the same time, I want the prey to escape from the predator, so I tell it distance has a high probability. When the prey makes a decision, it picks the action which leads to what I told it to expect. This predator and prey are animated by me. Hi. But I'm confident, with the right setup, Friston's free energy principle could get these two agents moving as if by their own thought. How? No matter how much I read, I don't think I'll ever find a tutorial which explains where the thoughts come from. Really, there are no quote-unquote thoughts here. When I made those generative adversarial networks which produced Pokemon pictures, I never wondered, gosh, where did that Pokemon come from? I never gave the generator a Pokemon. How did it get one? The Pokemon I see don't live in the generator or the picture. The Pokemon I see come from within me, the viewer, the observer, the beholder. I've been reading a book called You Are the Universe by Deepak Chopra. The book tries to disprove a determinist notion of the mind. It says the mind isn't limited by the brain, because the brain is not the origin of the mind. As the sort of math squid who makes this sort of video essay, I'll always be ranting about the complexity of machine learning algorithms deep as the human brain. But when I perceive the predator and prey seeming to make their own decisions, even though I know their thoughts I'm seeing are my own, I wonder where my thoughts are coming from. Who does the thinking here at Thinkster? The tutorial gets more explicit with the math in another post, and I'll get there eventually. I'll get there eventually because I believe it's likely that I will get there eventually, and therefore I reliably choose actions which lead me closer to getting there eventually, because that's what I expect. Somehow there is little doubt in my mind that this is how the mind works. I'll see you a few time steps in the future. Bye-bye.
He never makes another video about free energy principle.
So good. It's just a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
One-hit wonder.
All right.
Takes an unexpected turn. Like
Yeah.
I really love the emphasis on human action, though.
Yeah.
Goes straight into the ethical domain.
Mm-hmm.
You have all this abstract mathematics, and we're right back in the human.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Interesting. I actually had no. I'm glad we looked at that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Actually.
Okay, well, I think now is officially the time because we're getting close to dinner, so we have to talk about gluten.
Yeah.
Gluten hates me. That's all I know. But when we originally met, we had a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
About gluten. So
Yeah.
I thought you could tell us some things about that.
Yeah. I mean, I basically was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease 15 years ago. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I just knew I had like weird symptoms, and it turned. I mean, that they were caused by hormone imbalance in the thyroid hormones are were all out of whack, and then yeah, when I went to the doctor, they're like, okay, yeah, your thyroid levels are all off, TSH, T3, T4, and then they did another test for me, which test for TPO, this thing called TPO, which is like the thyroid antibody, and that thing was like off the charts, and normal people shouldn't have that. And I had like 1,000 times more than normal, and that's like the definitive way to diagnose someone with Hashimoto's, because it's clear that you have an immune response, and the only way you can have that much TPO in your bloodstream is because your immune system is attacking your thyroid tissue. So they didn't know why. They just like it could be environment, it could be genetics, a bunch of there's no cure. Standard procedure is basically get your body to become reliant on synthetic thyroid hormones, and then you just have to take this pill every day. And I just hated that idea, and I just felt like, why can't we figure out like why? Because I didn't have this problem before. Definitely something happened that made my immune system respond the way that it does. So I just started doing research, and then came across this book. I thought it was in the book that it wrote in. So I got the book here. Going back to it, I actually couldn't find where. It's like why I have. But in any case, along my research, if it wasn't this book, some other, I found a plausible explanation, which is the mimicry, the molecular or protein mimicry theory, and that's basically saying there's something in your body that's causing the immune response, and it could be a protein on a bacteria in your gut, it could be from a virus, it could be something you eat, like gluten. And that's what it was suggesting for Hashimoto's disease, that gluten has like, there's different like sub components to the gluten. You can fractions, they call them, and it's like glutenin. The two major ones are glutenin and gliadin, and I think gliadin causes celiac disease. So the shape of gliadin resembles some tissue in the gut. So when it's revealed or digested, it takes a while to break it down and for it to reveal, and then by the time it does, it gets into your small intestines, and then like your immune system responds, and then and then you have bloatedness and all sorts of indigestion problems, and that's what celiac disease is. People who eat gluten, they can't handle it, their stomach. But the other thing, I suspect it's the gluten part. That's similar to thyroid, and what happens is your immune system gets used normally these things shouldn't trigger a response, because if they really just stay in your gut and go out, so this is where it's unclear. Is that there's a theory about permeability. These things are permeating through, and on your other side, it's all your white blood cells and your immune system. It sees the thing, and it goes attack, and because it's always permeating through your system, it constantly is active. And then because of the protein 3D structure, it recognizes parts of that, and there are parts of that in your thyroid cell protein. There's proteins in your thyroid cell that resembles the same structure shape, and then it gets attacked by the immune system as well.
So the immune system's just friendly fire, basically.
Exactly. It gets confused because essentially you have friendlies that are dressed similar to the enemies. Right. So I just thought, that was mind blowing. It's a plausible theory. I haven't seen any plausible theory, and this one at least describes a plausible mechanism for this to happen. For sure. And we see, we're imitative animals, humans are. Obviously, we see mimicry in nature. Biomimicry is often a good technological strategy. Not always, but oftentimes, we figure things out by imitating nature. So it's not a surprise to me that imitation would be at the root of this mix-up, right? It's almost like having a spy in a way. In a war. It could just be random, but it is the randomness that makes it survive that. So it develops it because it ultimately survives. Yeah. So then, okay. So knowing that, how do we test it? So then it sort of becomes easy, right? If it really is gluten, then you should be able to just eliminate gluten from your diet. See if the immune response still is high, and that can be tested with DPO. That's what I did. I did a pretty strict, as strict as I can. It's never totally 100%, just because gluten's everywhere. Within a month, it dropped 10x. So I went from 1,000 times over to 100 times over. Okay. And then you go back and you see it goes if it goes back up or not. And this is where it's if it goes back up, then it's strong correlation. Mine sort of stayed the same, and then I just decided to cut more. Yeah. And then it went down even more. Gotcha. And it went down to 10. To that, it was still 10x more than normal. Yeah. But because the normal is so small, 10x is still pretty small. And all my other thyroid levels went back to normal. Wow. So TSH, T3, which impacts T3, T4. Yeah. So I just, since then, I basically stayed gluten-free for the next 5 or 6 years, and then, or maybe 7 or 8 years, and then at some point, I just felt like I was cured. I was I started eating gluten and I didn't feel any effects. I was like, oh, maybe I'm cured. But when that time so in the beginning I was getting tested a lot. And then I kind of got lazy and I wasn't testing as much. And then I would do it maybe once a year, and it was just always remained at 10x. It just never went back down. or I mean, I couldn't get it lower, no matter how. So I didn't know if there's something else or there's that part I still never figured out because I was never able to get it into normal levels. But it was at a level that did not impact the thyroid hormones, which is the thing that causes the
Did your symptoms ever come back when you started eating again?
It eventually did. It took years.
Oh, really?
And once it did, I had different symptoms. That was weird too.
Wow.
I didn't get my old symptoms because if I had the old symptoms, I would have known like, oh,
Yeah.
it's my thing coming back. I just got like these dizziness symptoms, and then I initially I didn't know what was going on. Thought maybe something with my heart because it's usually when I am like laying down or like sitting down and I stand up quickly, and then it's like I feel lightheaded, like I'm gonna like collapse or something. And one time I actually did fall over, and then I was like, okay, I need to get myself checked out. And then the doctor was like, you had a Hashimoto thing, and I was like, yeah. He's like, you should check your thyroid levels again. And I checked it; it was off the charts. And this is like after I think there's a couple of years I didn't check, and then it creeped up to quite a bit. And then she didn't know anything.
Yeah.
This is a different doctor now, so she's like, okay, we can do the synthetic thyroid thing again.
Yeah.
She was gonna prescribe me. I was like, hold up,
Yeah.
I got this gluten-free thing that I tried like 10 years ago, and it works like wonderfully.
Yeah.
And give me a month to go gluten-free, and she's like, there's no way it's gonna work. Like you're like, I've had so many, like I've never heard of this. I've seen some people claim, but never in practice anyone has this. And then I'm like, just let me try, and let's see what happens. If it doesn't work, I'll take the pills or whatever. Right? 2 weeks, like
Gone.
Completely gone.
Why do you think
gone.
she said that? Do you think people just don't follow the protocol, or is she just?
I think she just never seen it before. And then when I showed her, she's like amazed. She's like, wow, I can't believe it. She's like slacking her colleagues, like, hey, I got this patient that actually can get benefits from going gluten free.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how to. So since then, I just.
And you're good.
I'm never going back to gluten.
Nothing else bothers you food wise? Carbohydrates, fried foods, spicy,
I mean, they do in the normal sense of like if if I overeat, I'm gonna feel bloated.
But no symptoms or no auto.
Yeah, the thyroid symptoms are not there, and every time I check, I'm about 10x over normal. But my thyroid level, the hormone levels are normal. It's only TPO, which is the antibody. That's still 10x, but again, I saw it dramatically come down over time when I started to cut gluten.
That's amazing. I'm really happy to hear you figured it out.
Yeah.
But
I suspect there's something else because it's still not normal, and this is where it's like, and then the other question to ask is just like, is it permeability, and like why what's causing that? Like you can keep on pulling on the thread and see where it goes, but
man, good on you figuring it out. Mine has been a little more frustrating. I cut gluten out completely, and it definitely, I got huge benefits from it. Symptoms went down and whatnot.
What were your symptoms?
It's like gut inflammation, but I also have an autoimmune condition that manifests as basically just a cosmetic thing.
But the gut could be autoimmune too, right?
Yeah, well, I think they're connected because they started happening around the same time. And the autoimmune symptoms I have are just cosmetic now, but the condition can get really bad. Like you'd have very adverse effects for people if it gets too far. So cutting gluten out was very helpful, but it didn't heal the symptoms entirely. I did have 2 root canals removed last year now, 2024. Those seem to reduce the symptoms a lot. I got those out after watching the documentary titled The Root Cause, which goes into apparently the root canals keep dead flesh inside of the cavity, and the bacteria will eat off the dead flesh, and it's like a cascading effect of
So there's inflammation constantly in there.
pathology.
That makes
exactly.
sense.
So, I mean, I'm going to get the other 2 removed soon, and then hope that's kind of the trick. But yeah, gluten and carbs recently have been bothersome. I found ways to like eat carbs and take supplements that will balance out the symptoms, but I can't just eat carbs by themselves really, which is frustrating.
Yeah, because I heard you had like an issue with carrot,
Even carrots, carbohydrates. I mean, they didn't bother me as much, but I could still tell that I had carbs. Like I didn't feel optimal.
And carrots before was fine, or just
the carb thing. That's the other thing. Like it changes over time.
Yeah,
right? I didn't
that's
used to have
really
a carb
strange.
issue,
Yeah.
but I think, and it may have something to do with going full carnivore for a while. Like I went full carnivore for a period of time, and then it was difficult for me to digest carbs afterwards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that may have something to do with it. But I was going full carnivore to try to fix other issues that were more acute, let's say.
Yeah.
And it's been a puzzle.
I'm starting to, I think a lot of issue is like gut biome. Like the gut biome, your diet completely changes it, and so many things change especially if you've taken like antibiotics or anything, that completely nukes it, and then whatever grows back is like, who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a good way to
rebuild it.
I hear good things about like fecal transplant. That's probably the only. Yeah. But I don't know what like.
I've actually done, a version of that basically. It's like, it's not a less intense than what it sounds. Yeah, it's pills, and then there's also rectal too. But I basically did that, and it helped for a while, but didn't fix everything.
I see. Wow, they should be able to do analysis on your stool sample to see the balance of.
Yeah, and I've done a couple previously.
Is it pretty normal?
Well, they were just like, I don't know, they couldn't tell. But then the latest doctor I'm working with has recommended a different version of the test that's maybe more, I don't know, accurate or whatever, test for other things.
Yeah.
And so I'm about to do that one.
I see. Yeah, that because I've been seeing a lot of reports on like the gut biome, how much like it changes people. Like even like neural.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Like there's like I think they did experiments of like depressed people and getting their gut biome into normal people. Not people. They were doing it on mice. Depressed mice gut biome or fecal transplant into normal. And the normal mice became depressed.
Wow.
And then they removed it, and they became normal.
Wow.
So it was just like this gut biome, like affects your mood.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
We are an ecology of
like I said,
microorganisms.
there's more bacteria in this ecosystem than cells.
Yeah.
So most of you are actually bacteria.
Wow.
That's
incredible.
crazy, right?
That is crazy to think of it that way.
Yeah.
They're totally separate organisms.
Yeah. Like everyone's kind of doing their own things, and somehow it's like society. It's
like
everyone's trying to make money.
Yeah,
They're doing their
exactly.
thing, and you got the capitalist system society going.
Absolutely, yeah. The unification under a common flagpole or a common symbol or a common purpose, maybe in the case of the organism.
Yeah, it's like what is the nation?
A group of people directed at a common purpose, presumably, but
does it have to have a border then?
No. Now we're getting into statism. They're tax farms. They put up the borders to gatekeep and extort you at every transaction and every passage between jurisdictions.
Yeah, I that led me to think something else. I'm just jumping all over the place. Like I know you talk about inflation, printing money, how that's like bad, but here's something I think, I don't know how related this is. I'm kind of going over
Nothing's
my
off
excuse.
limits.
But basically, if you think about like just getting taxed, like I sell you something, right? You pay me money, or I go to work, I make a salary, get a cut, right? The money I have is already taxed, right? And then I use this tax money, I go buy something, I pay it to you. Now you have to pay tax on that, right? That's now your income, right? And then, so you only have
And
a cut.
you paid tax on it too, if it's sales tax.
Yeah, and I pay and then
income tax,
then
exactly, yeah.
and then it goes to you, and then you
Do the same thing.
do the same thing. You buy something,
Right.
so like each cut is pretty big, isn't it? So I mean, it doesn't take that much circulation before like 99% of it is
gone.
all taxed,
Yeah,
right? So then like money just disappears after a certain amount of transactions, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, maybe printing it does make sense because money's constantly getting taxed and it's like deflationary, right? Your supply is going back to the government and you have less supply in circulation. So that does require you to print more just to
Or
keep
eliminate
everything
taxation.
down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thought. I was
what's
like,
actually getting
I thought of one legitimate reason to print more money, which is because there's so much taxation.
You know what's funny? That is the modern monetary theory, MMT. That is their argument, actually.
Oh yeah,
It's you can tax society as much as you want. I'm sorry, you can print as much money as you want. You can run inflation as hot as you want. And if it starts to create unemployment, then you just tax people more.
Yeah.
And you get unemployment back. It's like it is such a circle jerk idea. It's like, so the key, I guess, way to think about that is it's not the money that's being destroyed per se, although nominally it is, right? Nominally money is coming out of circulation, but it's the actual purchasing power that's getting destroyed because a group that did not earn that purchasing power is now going to spend it, right? So they have a broken incentive, right? It's, you're much more likely to be spendthrift with money you didn't earn. If someone gives you a free roll in Las Vegas, right, you're going to just blow the money.
Yeah.
Right? There's no prudence associated with that.
Yeah. If
that
they're putting in
exchange.
more than that's going out.
Yeah, it's an asymmetry of risk in a way. They're benefiting from risk that some entrepreneur took and got taxed on. And there could be an argument that like, oh, you do need physical security, right? You need to secure the borders or whatever. And we do need physical security, but there's no convincing argument, according to libertarian philosophy, that needs to be centrally monopolized and under the paradigm of a central state. You could actually have private security services. So I'm a little more in the camp of technology influencing the shape of social organization by changing the economics of violence. So, there's a period in time where the armed knight on horseback was the dominant force on the land. Like, one armed knight on horseback could kill 50 peasants. It was also very expensive to own a war horse and own a suit of armor. So that was like used as a tool for exploitation and taxation, actually. It was the ruling arm of the medieval church. Then gunpowder is invented. And this changes the economics of violence in that now one peasant can kill an armed knight on horseback at 50 yards with a rifle, or more. And so that completely upends social organization. It collapses the ruling arm of the medieval church. It sort of paves the way for the nation state. There were all other technological disruptions going on, like the printing press and whatnot, contributing to this change in ideology and widespread cognitive software updates, let's say literacy, numeracy, all these things. But in general, I think the economics of violence really shape social organization. And that's why I think Bitcoin is such a profound innovation, actually. It's the most defensible form of purchasing power of private property in the history of the human race. So if you can keep a secret, basically, you can secure any amount of purchasing power. So it's a non-physical, digital, informational bearer asset. And it's unlike anything humanity's ever had. So now voting with our feet, right, which is what we should do to kind of keep the state honest. Voting with our feet carries a much higher signal because now we can flee with all of our capital between our ears. right? You can vote with your feet in a very high signal way. Whereas in the past, you leave Soviet Russia, you leave with the shirt on your back, right? They're taking everything at the border, or they've already taxed it away, or they've outright seized it, something like that. So seizure-resistant private property, I think, facilitates a world with more long-term trading relationships and less exploitative, coercive relationships, because stealing has become less profitable, basically. So sorry, I took a tangent.
No, it's great. We're free flowing.
Yeah.
I'm jumping all over the place too.
Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking, in the face of violence, I think I would give up my private keys.
The other problem, well, yeah, of course you can, but if you keep it in a multi-key, there's ways to secure that it's even immune to violence. They call it the $5 wrench attack in Bitcoin. But if you put it in a multi-key custody schema, it's kind of like, the rough analogy would be if you've seen people securing nuclear launch codes in a movie. You know, there's a handful of guys that each have their own key.
You have
they have to perform a very specific ritual.
Yeah.
You turn the keys at a certain time in a certain way. Well, you can implement all of that into your Bitcoin custody schema. It's a little more involved, but there's companies that do it, and they handhold you through the process. So yeah, there's something else I was going to say, but I guess I lost it. Yeah, Bitcoin's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I'm almost a maxi. I'm not. I like to keep a little bit open mind, but for the most part, like I had a coworker. He's complete Mac. Like so like almost all of his paycheck just goes directly to the Bitcoin. Later on, this is like from 2017 to 2020. He sold his house and went all in on Bitcoin.
Amazing.
Yeah. I think he's pretty happy now.
Yeah.
Of the choices he made.
Yeah.
And he just, every day we went to lunch, he brainwashes me a little bit, and I become enlightened a little bit. And then, that's where I acquired during that period the most.
Back to our conversation earlier with the guy that did the meta game of life, right? The game of life inside the game of life. You know, there was something else too that reminded me of the quote. I forgot what it was, but Carl Jung said, "People don't have ideas; ideas have people." Well, I've been asking this question about who's executing the code at the highest level of the meta game of life. Yeah, that's. Where was I going with that shit? Oh, just what Bitcoin is, basically. It's like, like, obviously we all struggle to define Bitcoin and Bitcoin world, right? There's a lot of analogies, the internet of money, digital gold, et cetera, et cetera. But really it's just an idea, ultimately. There's a ritualized idea in place, facilitated by software and energy expenditure. Yeah. But it's a consensus point, right? It's a Schelling point, game theoretically. Rooted in the physical world through energy expenditure. So it's like an idea or an ideal, even fixed money supply, made real. Yeah. Right, through energy, through proof of work mining, basically.
Do you think people will transact on chain, or does it need like more? Like, will people actually spend Bitcoin?
I think
at some point,
I think you'll see the medium of exchange function work better at layer 2 and up, like Lightning Network, etc. Yeah, I think
but they will be transacting with Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, technically you're not. It's like you're transacting with a Bitcoin derivative at that point.
Yeah, that's true.
You've basically staked Bitcoin, and then the what you're moving across those chains of smart contracts are just derivatives. But you can settle the main chain whenever you want. So it's game theoretically balanced. I think that, I see transaction throughput occurring mostly there, and then main chain for large settlements. You know.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the unit of transaction is not like
it'll be sats.
Yeah, it'll still be Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I mean it's fractions of Bitcoin, not some random token or something, right?
No, I think it'll be sats. Yeah, or if it becomes microsats, or
sure,
more divisibility,
right.
Or whatever we ultimately call it. We may not call it sats. We call it sats now, but who knows what the market, what term we decide to coalesce.
Those are just labels.
Yeah, exactly.
There
Back
is
to
labels.
Yeah.
Everybody, as long as we establish consensus
Yes.
on what the unit is. Yeah.
There's an author in Bitcoin named Gigi, and he's written this piece where basically arguing that Bitcoin is the only instance of where the map is the territory. Like we've digitally abstracted and represented energy, basically blocks of energy. So like the mathematics and the reality fully cohere. I think that's an interesting. I don't know if I entirely agree with it because I don't know. That would mean Bitcoin's an extremely deep construct, which it is. But to reconcile the map and territory, that's like solving a philosophical conundrum.
I guess. Map. If it's I mean, the energy generation is tied to territories, so it ultimately it's energy that's backing Bitcoin, which leads to the territory that generates those energy backing Bitcoin. So I could see the connection there, I guess.
Yeah, and it's the only way to guarantee, I'll use that word, it's a high probability, I don't say it's a guarantee, proof of work or energy expenditure via proof of work mining is the only way to quote unquote guarantee a fixed supply asset. There's no other way to trust anyone not to change the rules. You basically have to prove this expenditure of energy to secure the money supply from being tampered with by anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, it's only vulnerable to the 51% attack, so you need to mobilize.
And then you have to make that. Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's like pretty much
impossible.
Yeah, even with quantum breakthrough, I feel like there will be enough time to implement. Wolfram actually, because he's on our board, or he's friends with friends. I guess he's considered friends with our institute. He actually, I think, said he doesn't believe in quantum computing being being a real thing, like doing actual useful work. Right now, it's just all theoretical. Like it's you can do some simple trivial stuff, like all the stuff they were claiming about doing. I mean, it's because the problem is set up to be like that. Yeah, and like, yeah, I remains speculative about quantum breaking all our hashes.
Well, it's been it's always been a cat and mouse game, cryptography, right? That we have a mathematical advance or cryptographic. I'm sorry, we break a cryptography, then we make a quantum resist. Or I'm sorry, a resistance to that break in cryptography. Yeah. Okay, one maybe last-ish topic. We'll see where we go. We were talking earlier before we hit record in the little office over there, and you brought up what I thought was an interesting metaphor. One I've thought about previously, and I just heard about it from someone. I don't recall where, but this idea of the story writing process, like when an author is writing fiction and he starts to write characters, that he gives these characters, stories, personalities, features, starts describing them basically. But at some point, that process of authorship, of storytelling or story writing, I guess in this case, the characters start to tell the author what, it's not purely a unilateral process, that there's some feedback that, once these characters are laid down, that they sort of the story starts to write itself in a way. Yeah. There's a feedback loop. Yeah. And that may sound a little crazy, but if some of the other authors, famous authors have said this. I think Dostoevsky said something like that, like his characters kind of start to write themselves. And anyways, if we assume that to be a dynamic of story writing, I thought when that came to me, it was like a very useful analogy for our relationship with God. It's like if God is the author, the authority, the author of all things, and we are avatars in that story or that thing he's dreaming up, whatever it may be. A being that's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, knows everything, has all the power, and is everywhere. And this is from the old text. What does that being lack? Well, that being lacks limitation, right? So God needed a limited, finite version of himself to complete himself in some way.
That's where we come alive and have free will.
Yeah. So then we are then writing God's story. I don't know. Like, anyways, when you brought that metaphor up, I was just like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago. So when you invoked, I don't know, what do you think about that metaphor? And then what? I actually forgot the reason you invoked it originally.
It's to talk about, I think, characters living in large language models. Large language models can create these characters, usually like ChatGPT. The prompt for ChatGPT's agent, it's like you're an agent that's trying to be helpful to human. Long ass, prompt. Like you can't talk about black people or something. Like, yeah, and it takes on that personality, and depending on how I suspect it's possible to have a virtual identity like that takes on its own life and have a subjective experience, and that's where it's like, it's almost like fiction characters coming to life, and and if we are in a simulation, there's a creator, like he can constantly look at. He might have. This is where I don't even. For a long time, I didn't believe in free will, just from listening to Sam Harris now I shifted a little bit. I'm starting to think maybe some people have free will and others don't. They're like in the simulation.
NPCs.
NPCs versus real players, right? Yeah. And I don't know if I'm NPC or a real player. I always believed I'm kind of an NPC. I'm like the NPC that's like looking for the player. And I want to join the party and help the player. That's like my NPC mission in life.
Interesting.
That's kind of how I make a lot of my decisions.
Maybe we're all a little bit of both. I mean,
there's different approaches. And someone said to me, "That's a good approach to becoming a main character."
Is it humility?
I don't know.
But to the extent our culture programs us, we're sort of NPC-ish, right? We're doing things unconsciously or running an unconscious program.
It's like if
the extent
you don't
to which
have
we self-program is more like being self-sovereign, self-liberated, individuated, something like that. So maybe we're all a little bit of both.
We're definitely influenced by our.
Of course.
Yeah, but the Sam Harris way of thinking about it is it's like we know the rules. Oh, we don't know the rules of the universe, but we do know that there's a cause and an effect, right? Like things you do caused by previous events, right? Yeah. Like some decision, even if I were to say, pick a random number, right? Like whatever you pick, you really have no agency in that. Like the number just kind of comes out in your head. You're not like, I'm gonna just pick a number. Right. It could be a number that you saw yesterday.
Well, you could pick a non-random number though. You could, like, every time someone asks you that, you pick the same number. So there's there's a component of agency.
Why would you pick that number? It's because you always picked it before, right? For in the case where if you're picking it all the time,
maybe I don't know. I mean,
and then you can always trace back to what causes you to do something. And there are experiments done where it's like you make a decision, but the signals in your brain already like they know, they can detect. I think this experiment is like, I forgot the name, but it's like you pressing. It's like pressing a button, and has something to do with pressing a button and the light comes on. I forgot exactly the details, but it's like the researchers, they know you're gonna press the button before you even press the button.
Right.
Like up to like seconds, like 3 seconds ahead or something like that. Something crazy, and it helps define this narrative that we just do things and then we explain it later. We sort of make up this story.
Rationalization.
Yeah, exactly. Do things first. And they've done experiments where people with split brain, where left brain, right brain's not is severed, and then they're able to like get one side to do something, and they'll be like stand up and and go to the door, and then they would stand up, and then on the other side they would like ask, why did you stand up? And it would just completely make up a story. It's like I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm thirsty, or something like that. It just demonstrates how much this kind of stuff is going on in your head, and you, I guess this is why I ultimately felt like whatever the reason you're doing things, there's a prior, then there's no free will, because everything, you just have to have the first thing happen, and the domino will just fall. Everything follows.
But reality changes. So we encounter entropy, right? And then we adapt, we adjust our strategy or our course of action. Our goals change, our course of goal-directed actions change.
Yes,
so
but that's all results of randomness.
That's what I'm saying, but there's an irreducible randomness in the
But introducing randomness still doesn't get you free will. You're still at the mercy of your environment and these things.
If you can choose how to respond to different manifestations of entropy, I think you could still have free will. That's not to say every time entropy hits me this way, I go that way. It's like you could,
except this is where it's like, did you really choose it, or did you respond to your environment and then you rationalize it as you choosing it? That's where So anyway, long story short, like I felt like I was always struggling with that, and now the best the best compromise I can make is some people are and some people aren't. that's where I'm landing now, and I don't know if I am or not, but it feels like I'm not. I have this metaphor of like, we're just like characters written in a book. It's already written. Like my fate's already sealed. And then I can't jump ahead and read the end to see what happens. So I'm just reading these things as time goes through. It's like me reading the pages.
They have this term in I think it's in the Middle Eastern languages, maktub. It is written. It's in the book The Alchemist. And I would I tend to agree with you with the metaphor overall, but I think the present moment, right, where the computation is being executed, as Wolfram was saying, right, that the flow of time was computation being executed. That is the book presently being written, rather than the book is already written and it's a done deal and you have no freedom and you're on this inexorable track of fate. I believe we are co-creative and we are participants in our own creation. I think that's proved through innovation. In fact, like we could just sit around in the caves forever and just beat each other over the head and steal each other's food. We still do that, only with more sophisticated technologies. But we did crawl out of the caves and create, computers and light and electricity and artificial intelligence and all these things. I mean, that seems like an expression of the creative principle within us. And well, what is that? It's like imitating God, if God is this creative impulse in reality. So I don't know. I formally condemn
most people
lack of free will.
Yeah,
like I believe freedom
Diana
is almost
and
like
I
the
talked
essential.
about this, and she's totally on your side too.
Yeah, the essential state maybe is the universe freely unfolding in self-organizational, self-generative ways, and even what is it in Shiva, the dance of destruction and creation? Like it's bound. They're bound together in a way that semantics struggle to articulate. But
I'm slowly, I think, coming to that side a little bit. I think even Yosha's on that same page too. Yeah. So I should adopt that philosophy
or maybe it's just the presumption that gives you the most psychological benefit or something.
Yeah, maybe it's the best way to become a main character.
There you go. Life feels a lot better when you assume freedom is real, right? If you just assume you're a automaton, nothing you try to do or change matters, well, then you're going to be nihilistic pretty quick.
Not necessarily. I mean, it didn't affect me that way.
Yeah,
I could hold both beliefs just fine, just because I can think about choosing to be nihilistic is still a choice. And if the book is already written for me to not be nihilistic and for me to be hardworking and creative, that's already written. And there's nothing I can do to stop that. And I would just continue down that path. Like the universe will take me down this path regardless of, like, it will make me want to work hard if that's what it is written.
And in a way, you're putting the locus of power, decision making back on yourself, because you're choosing to interpret it that way, right? Even if the book is already written, you're kind of interpreting the most favorable scenarios.
Yeah, you could say that, but maybe that is. You can imagine if I write a fiction character, that's what was written, right? I could write this character who's like confused about free will, and then it believes it has free will or not, and then it believes that it needs to be hardworking, but it doesn't have to experience anything because it's already written.
Right.
So,
but what if some point in writing that book, that character changes the course you were taking the book down? Like, say you planned to take him when you started the book to he has no free will, but by the end of the book, the story somehow written itself, and now he's got free will. Then you're back in that conundrum.
Yeah, maybe. But the author still provides the conditions that it faces.
Yeah,
and
that's what God does for reality, right? He provides the conditions.
I think I started with, like, someone was talking about artists, like true artists, are chosen by God, and they cannot help but do the work of God. So it's like, even though they might be suffering, they hate the fact that I'm painting these paintings, but I can't stop.
Yes,
and it's being obsessed about, like, doing this because it's like as if God has chosen me to do this, right?
Yes.
That makes me think, like the people who didn't get chosen to do that, they might have gotten chosen to do something else, or they might have gotten chosen just to be NPCs.
Yes, I've heard that. I love that you brought that up. I've heard it described as the paradox of freedom, which actually I picked up from a book.
Yeah, you don't have freedom at that point, right?
Well, here's the thing. So I got this from the book, The Role of the Individual in History. It's a really short book, but it's really good, older one. And the idea is that you have freedom to choose paths through life. But if you're lucky, at some point, that freedom will evolve into a paradox in which you discover the one path that you can't not take.
Right.
Like your life's purpose or mission or passion or whatever that path is for you. And that's the paradox. It's like, oh, in your liberality, you discovered this like self-tyranny, if you will, right? Like you tyrannize yourself to this purpose. And that sounds a lot like the artist you're describing. It's like they just, I don't, you know, I guess I don't know. That's still an expression of free will to me. But freedom is a bit paradoxical. Maybe that attests to how philosophically deep it is.
Internal struggles. There are parts of that person, I think, that don't want to do it, but it's almost compulsive that they have to do it.
Yeah.
So this is like I think we have that clip where there's different versions living in this animal, and you identify with this one that has control over language and can speak, and there might be others like this might not even be your favorite one, right? Like you often, less so these days, but in my younger days, I definitely experienced things like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I know this is not what I want to do, but I can't stop myself from doing it. You know, like that kind of thing. It's like I have no control over my body.
So true. So so we're like, again, back to the layers, right? We have all these different systems on top of subsystems that have conflicting preferences. Dude.
Yeah.
What a conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I love it.
This is awesome. Thank you for coming to Miami. And this is a wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah, we were just all
from, well, I don't know where we've been even. From the cosmos to gluten to freedom. So I don't. If you want to plug anything here, let people know where they can find you. Any parting words of wisdom?
I'm on Twitter. I have a Twitter. It's Zhen, my name, Zhen, 9436. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Zhen, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and click here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help us shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.